Well, the good news, I guess, is as far as we know, Kevin Biggio will not have to have his pinky finger removed. And Stephen Brundy should be able to.
Four Fingers Biggio. He'd have a new nickname.
Three Finger Mordecai, Four Fingers Biggio.
Yeah, why not?
I mean, we shouldn't joke about it.
No, we're not joking.
The Jays have had, they've become a mash unit. And, today there was word that Kevin Biggio was a late scratch with discomfort in his pinky finger, which is fine, his right pinky finger, as long as it ain't broken. So, and there's no indication that it is, but given what's happened, like seriously, if I'm running the Blue Jays right now, I'm hiding all the knives, all the scissors. I'm, making sure none of the doors are locked. They're all going to be open.
Nobody takes the stairs.
Nobody takes the stairs. Exactly. Going to make sure there's nothing slippery anywhere. Anyhow, the Jays are currently having their way with the New York Yankees.
With the New York Yankees opening day lineup, too.
Yeah, and with Davy Cruz pitching. So.
Yeah, so they're
there you go.
Bo Bichette's starting to see the baseball. That's a good sign.
Bo Bichette has had, I believe I was reading, he's had like his 3 biggest exit velocities in the past couple of games. So there you go.
Marcus
Those of you who are worried about Bo Bichette's 2 for 19 spring, you forget it. Anyhow.
Teoscar hit one to the moon, so that's good.
Well, Ken Rosenthal will join us later on in the show. We're going to try to take a deeper dive into some of Ken's reporting in the Kirby Yates
It was really interesting.
Situation.
Huh?
It was interesting. And for those of you who have not read it, of course, Kirby Yates is done. Kirby Yates' Blue Jays career never got started. And he will more than likely need TJ surgery, and he won't be pitching this year. But a couple of things Ken Rosenthal reported. One, the Atlanta Braves were also interested in Kirby Yates. Took a look at the medicals and went, yeah.
Now they were, but that was at $12 million.
That was at $12 million.
Yes, that was at $12 million. But they looked at it. They didn't like the risk at $12 million.
They didn't like the risk at $12 million. Further to his reporting, at one point the Jays and Kirby Yates were apparently talking something around $8.5 million. That got whittled down to $5.5 million with a bunch of benefits tacked on, which makes me sound as if at some point, essentially what the Jays said is, there's a good chance you're going to get hurt. Kirby Yates said, there's a good chance I'm going to get hurt. The Jays said, look, let's find a manageable level of risk here. And Kirby Yates said, if I got to blow my arm out, it's better to have a contract and have a team taking care of me.
Yeah, no,
essentially, that's what it was. Two sides managing risk.
And I think they Ross or Charlie, it was probably Ross, actually said something along those lines, like high risk, high reward, right? And if you get a whole season out of him at $5 million, you're 5.5. You're doing okay.
No, I'm not saying I would do that. Personally, but that's it's not my decision to make.
Well, I guess there would be the opportunity cost, although $5 million doesn't get you a lot in baseball.
No, but I may have focused $5 million coupled with Tanner Roark's, what is it, $12 million?
Yeah, you can't just make him go away, though.
Yeah, but that's $17 million worth of poop, basically.
Well, you can't. Well, we'll see if Tanner Roark can hold on a place in that rotation for half a year. That to get him to some of the other guys, but it's not like you can make him vanish. So that is a sunk cost.
Well, yeah, but
so it's not that. So that's not. But in terms of the $5 million, the thing that occurred to me, I was thinking about this today. We do know that during the Jays' 2 playoff eras, short as they were, but the World Series teams anyway. The closing was done by homegrown guys, right?
Yeah, yes.
And during the glories of 2015, 2016, the closing was done by homegrown guys.
Sure,
right?
It was done by Osuna.
Anytime they've gone out and signed guys who were closers other places, who it's not been good.
Well, I mean, B.J. Ryan was okay for 2 years. Then it just flatlined.
Well, the drug testing kind of got in the way for him, right? That's one of the small problems he had. Bill Cottle was a horrible disaster.
Yeah,
they invested heavily in him back in the day. One of their first big splurges because it was an organizational issue for years.
No, the history of the Jays closing, successful Jays closing, there's a whole bunch of Aquilino Lopez's in there, and obviously Roberto Osuna was better than Aquilino Lopez, but
Osuna fixed it. Osuna fixed it, right? At a time when they didn't know who it was going to be, and just like Tom Henke fixed it,
right.
And then Dwayne Ward came on top of him, right? It's they have had luck. Again, it is a small sample size over a long franchise history, but their best days have been when somebody has emerged who, not in Henke, because Henke was never thought of as a starter. By the time they got him, he was a reliever.
Mm-hmm.
But, Osuna was a starter. and and he came up as a starter, and then had Tommy John, and there are a bunch of reasons why he turned into a reliever that year, mostly need, right? Because they didn't have, they just were throwing stuff at the wall that spring. So what I'm saying is that the arrow's pointing at Jordan Romano as the next closer of the Toronto Blue Jays. Well, that would line up with some of this franchise's history.
Yeah,
and I still like him as I would have said that even but I thought the Yates signing was really interesting when they made it, and I think I would have done it with that kind of risk reward equation because. If you got the guy he was 2 years ago, man, oh man, you got a heck of a bullpen.
Here's the thing, and I think we need. I think we need to look back at the fact that 2 years ago, this is a team that lost 95 games.
Yep.
We are basing an awful lot on a 60 game sample size.
Yeah, and 160. If last year's 162, they're not a playoff team.
No, and I'm wondering if. All the excitement aside, and signing George Springer. Signing George Springer makes sense for next year and the year after that and the year after that and the year after that and the year after that, in addition to this year. I wonder if maybe the fact that the Jays didn't add to the starting rotation, the fact that they, who knows, when you're dealing with free agents, guys are free, that they can come and go wherever they want. So I don't know why Liam Hendricks went to Chicago instead of Toronto. But it's entirely possible that the Jays looked at this and said, we can't come out and say that this isn't the year, but maybe this isn't the year.
Well, it's not the all-in year. It's not
exactly. Maybe this isn't the all-in year.
I think they think it's a postseason year, and I think that's a reasonable expectation that they're going to be in the hunt for a postseason berth. That's not guaranteed, but I think that's a reasonable. But I know we've kicked this around before, but like the free agent market was weird this year. Everything's weird, right? And most teams pulled in their horns because they had no idea what the revenue projections are going to be heading into this season, or how many games they're going to play this season. There were a whole bunch of everything was unknown, and I think the Jays had money to spend, but I think they also looked at the market and said, "There's an opportunity here. If there aren't many players in this market, we can do some things and we can build something for the beyond." Not just this year, but and I think they looked at kind of opportunity and said, "Let's." And I think they kicked a bunch of different tires, but Springer was the one, and I think he was the target. And I think they, but he's obviously not just a 1 year play. But I think they want to, they were looking at the starter market. I don't think that they loved anybody. They probably loved Trevor Bauer as a pitcher. I don't know if they love him as a human, but I think they, everything else was about 1 year.
Yeah,
give us flexibility next winter.
I've also got to say this. You remember Bill Madden? The Daily News had that article about Major League Baseball, sort of wondering
about how did they have money?
How did the Jays have all this money to spend all of a sudden? And this happened. Listen, I'm sure there are folks around Major League Baseball, owners around Major League Baseball who, what the hell's going on here? But it is interesting to note that after that article came out, nobody made a big deal about it.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, Bill Madden's sources are pretty good, but Bill Madden's sources were also Yankees guys. And I could see the Yankees being pissed at some of this. But nothing happened after that.
No,
they didn't sign anybody. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I think the bolt was shot by then, though. But it may be. I think it's also. I think there are a bunch of teams out there. The Yankees fans are used to them spending and spending and spending. They didn't do it, right? They went. They went out and brought back LeMahieu, but.
Oh, they're basically hitching their wagon to reclamation projects.
Yeah.
Jameson Tyan, Corey Kluber, who's not looked that impressive this spring.
So you want to go out there and explain, well, how come those other guys are spending? And there's all kinds of ways you could whisper about that. And it may be true. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm also saying, look, I think a lot of baseball teams, and it's not like they haven't taken a huge revenue hit and are about to take a huge revenue hit. They are, but their TV deal looks pretty good.
Yep.
But this is great cover, right? And it's same reason teams have,
of course, it's great cover.
Laid off a whole bunch of people in their organizations who actually weren't making any money.
It's too good a crisis to let pass.
Yeah,
I mean, it really is.
So there's some of that going on too.
So anyhow, we'll talk to Ken Rosenthal about that particular situation. David Sampson joins us as well. We'll talk about managing risk with David Sampson. Got to talk about Tim Peel. Now the first thing that came to my mind is NHL Twitter lit up last night. Of course, Tim Peel has been Tim Peel was a referee who was going to retire at the end of the year. Anyhow,
the end of the month, apparently.
The end of the month,
said, yeah.
And the NHL has basically said, "Nah, you're retired now," because he was caught on a hot mic. And this is the thing. We don't get the context. We don't get the whole comment. But basically, he's caught on a hot mic suggesting that he felt that he had to call a penalty
on Nashville
early in the second for some reason.
Well, we don't have the whole.
We don't have the whole.
Sadly, we don't have the whole. The transcript ends at that point.
So of course everybody's up in arms, and it's like the hockey world has discovered that referees actually manage games. I saw a couple of well-known national commentators saying, "I don't know why referees just." See the penalty, call the penalty. Okay. If you want every penalty seen by the referee called, pull up a chair. Your games are going to be about 8.5 hours, and you're never going to have any 5-on-5. And your star player is going to be bagged after a couple of days because he's playing 70 minutes a night on the power play. People do not understand this. You do not want a referee calling every penalty. You don't want it in football. You don't want it in basketball. You don't want it in hockey. People also don't understand that every year, the NBA holds a news conference. The NBA in every city brings reporters in with directors of officiating from the office. I sat in these, and they say, this is our point of emphasis this year. These are the things we're looking at in particular. These are the rules changes. This is how it impacts it. You can ask questions to the officials. Games are managed. That's part of the deal. So I look at Tim Peel. I would tell you this. I would be willing to bet that there isn't a referee, there isn't an official in any sport who at some point hasn't said to another official, you know what? Got to call a penalty here to even it up.
Yeah, although it's a weird one, like because the context doesn't work with this one, and I'd love to know what it was about.
Yeah,
right?
But in
terms of what you're saying, yeah, I get it. Like the even up penalty for sure. I missed it. Don't worry, I'll.
But it's like
deal with it later on. That's happened historically. Yes,
people believing their mother's a virgin.
There's an element of that.
It really is. There's gambling at Rick's, but now the whole point is. It's great. Everybody wants the hot mic, everybody wants everybody mic'd up and all that, and it's great TV and everything. But I'm just saying that sometimes I think we know too much. Sometimes I think we see a little too much of how the sausage is made. And it stops being fun.
Yeah, but here's the problem, though, Jeff. That the games have. I understand. Yes, games have been managed and conversations have been had, and all and I'm sure even petty vendettas have been carried out on it. Just on occasion.
Would it be great if holding was called every time there was holding in the NFL? But you'd still be playing the Super Bowl.
But here's your problem: that all these leagues are about to get in bed with gambling in a big way, and the NBA did have a dirty ref.
Yeah.
So the appearance of absolute impartiality.
Are you saying that you think Tim Peel was involved in gambling?
I know. I'm saying that if penalties are called for reasons that are inexplicable, if games are penalties
are called inexplicable. Penalties are called every day.
If you believe that the motivation for calling it, and look, why do you think they fired him?
Well, I think they fired him because they had to send a message.
That's the whole exactly.
Yeah, but I don't think Tim Peel did anything wrong.
Well, if he called a penalty, it wasn't a penalty. He did something wrong. Because, again, this is not letting something go. This is calling something that didn't happen.
Nonsense.
Well, that's what he said. Have you seen? Look at the play.
Listen.
He said he had to call a penalty on a play where there was no penalty.
Listen, if
it's not letting it go, Jeff. No, the opposite is letting it go and letting him play. Yes, that happens all the time.
I know. But all I'm saying is, if gambling is the reason you're going to do this.
Well, they would have fired him if there's no gambling.
Yeah, but
he's going to get fired no matter what.
But this idea that, then we have to have, teams have to announce their rosters ahead of game time. Like they've got to do, if we're going to get in bed with gambling, to make it easy for the gamblers, you got to do all this. You've got to reveal all this information.
I think you're going to have NFL-style disclosure in all leagues. I think that's common. There's no question about that. They're going to have to.
I think it's funny because it's one of those things everybody knows it goes on.
Yeah, but again, it's not. He didn't not call a penalty because what you're talking about is not calling penalties. He called a penalty that wasn't a penalty. I'm sure, and again, we don't know the context. I'm sure he had a reason for it. Okay, what would that be?
I don't know. Was somebody chirping at somebody? Did he think that somebody had said something to somebody? Did somebody?
That's not game management.
Let me finish.
That's not game management.
Somebody come up to him and say, "Hey, you got to start." Again, this happens. Well, that happens all the time. Guys talking the ice to officials. Mm-hmm. Working officials is an art form.
But that's not game management.
I think it is game management. Yes, it is game management. I think it is.
In a nothing game between Nashville and Detroit.
Were you watching the game?
I just watched the play. But
were you watching the game?
But do you think? Well, give me a context where that would be justifiable. Give me one.
I think if a guy is getting the sense that something's happening out of hand or something out of the ordinary or something was said that we don't know that.
Yeah, but there's no justification for calling a penalty over something.
I don't know. Maybe you want to call a penalty to let a guy cool off. I'm just throwing this out there. We don't know because of the lack of context. We don't know because of the lack of context.
I don't think. I think you're.
What if the end of that
cartwools for this?
No,
but
what if
doesn't
the
make
end
sense.
of that conversation was that I had to call a penalty because they were chirping at me?
Then that's wrong. You can't call a penalty for that reason.
I think you can. You don't think that officials
call a penalty because you heard something.
Here's the thing: you can call that penalty, but you can't talk about it on a hot mic. This is the hot mic. If it wasn't for the hot mic, you can't
call a penalty because you're annoyed at somebody.
Sure, you don't think it happens?
You can't do it.
Let me ask you.
No, because there are humans involved, but you can't justify it. But it's not justifiable on any level.
But I'm saying it happens.
You're justifying. It's two different things.
I'm saying it happens. I'm saying it's understandable. I'm not justifying it, but I'm saying it's understandable. I'm not surprised by this.
Well, I'm not surprised that humans make mistakes, but you can't say this is kind of part of the game because that is not let them play, boys. Like that's. Then a non-call in managing a game is justifiable, potentially. A call because you're mad at somebody? Because you don't like the team? Because you don't like the coach? Because you don't like the player?
And that never happens?
I'm not saying, but it's not just, but you can't justify it. You can't say that's fine.
I'm not saying it's fine, but what I'm saying is I'm surprised at the overreaction to this. That, oh my God, this has never happened.
Well, it's not.
It's happened all the time. It's just that numbskull didn't turn his freaking mic off.
No, the reactions reactions I think is legit. It's opening a door on something.
Nashville? Did it cost them the game?
But that's not the point. Doesn't matter if it cost them the game.
I'm just asking, what was the outcome of it?
Well, the outcome is a 2-minute penalty, but it doesn't matter if it cost them the game.
And we don't know. We still don't know why it was called. Like, we don't have that full the full quote.
Well, okay.
Now, I will say this. I would presume if you're the NHL, first of all, who was he speaking to? Was he speaking to Kelly Sutherland,
speaking to either the other referee or one of the lines.
And I'm sure what they did is they talked to Kelly Sutherland, and I'm sure Kelly Sutherland probably told him what the context was. But it does seem, it is interesting that you would make that decision right away with the guy who's basically on the way out. That's...
Yeah,
it's convenient. There's really no reason not to let Tim Peel go.
Well, you could let it. You could have
gone anyhow.
You could have punished him on any number of levels. They got but they look. When's the last time the NHL made a decision this quickly about anything? Never.
And that is true.
That's the answer. Is never.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah. Think about player discipline.
That is true. Well, I mean, yeah, that is true with player discipline.
Goes on forever. Well, now and again, that's collectively bargained, etc. But they, were like this. How many hours did it take them to fire the guy?
Not many.
Yeah, there you go.
Not many. But again, it's easier to fire a guy when he's gone in 6 days.
Doesn't matter. They could have let him play it out. They fired him instantly.
I'm shocked that there's gambling at Rick's. No idea. No idea.
See, gambling is the best guard on keeping things on the up and up. If these guys are in the gambling business, they got more reason to keep it on the up and up.
Sure, as long as you're talking about athletes making millions of dollars a year. I'm not entirely certain gambling's a beautiful thing when you're talking about college athletes.
No, I'm just saying that it's but it is a reason to care about this stuff. People didn't start.
Have we had an NHL refereeing gambling scandal?
No.
In the past?
No, not that. No, we had just the NBA one is obviously the one that's off the charts, and obviously the college one millions of years
Tim
ago.
Donahue still dining out on that.
Yeah, well,
we've had him on the show several times. He's a great guest.
Yep, but it's the weird thing is sort of like it's like the stuff in soccer with the games being thrown.
Yeah,
and the only reason anybody ever paid attention to it was because they saw weird gambling patterns.
Well, and it's not just the result of the games too, right? It's the fact that and they talk about this in cricket. Don't ask me how I know this, but they talk about this in cricket as well. I mean, the proliferation of prop betting it has put even a.
Oh yeah.
It's not simply a matter now of the point spread is 2.5. No, there's a bunch of things. There's a bunch of things you can gamble on in game, and it's entirely possible that somebody's in somebody else's back pocket in the second inning of a baseball game.
But the great irony is that if you want more transparency and you want more scrutiny, you might as well get in bed with Bally's and Caesars and all those guys because they actually care.
Yeah, well,
they actually care about the fair outcome more than most people do.
And enjoy having your games, like I said, enjoy having your games slowed down because of penalties.
No, that's not. Again, I don't think the two things. Those are two different things.
Well, I wonder. Well, we don't know how Tim Peel is thought of by his other officials. Wouldn't it be something if the officials came out tonight and called everything, just everything, every little hook.
But again, it wasn't a non-call. It was a call. They did call. He called something that didn't happen.
If they decide to support their guy,
well, that's not going to happen. But they, remember again, he didn't not call something. He called something that didn't happen. That's different. It's the opposite. It's the opposite.
It happened.
No, it's not It's his interpretation. He needed to call something.
No, maybe
those are two different things.
I'm just saying. Well, we're going to be joined by Brian Lewis, a longtime NHL official. I'm going to ask Brian: is there a time during a game where he felt I had to call something? Like I'll ask him, what could Tim Peel have been talking about? That's probably a better question. Mm-hmm. What could Tim Peel have been talking about?
Yes. I think, to avert a bloodbath? Yeah. Yes. I don't know that there was going to be a bloodbath.
Just hang on for a minute. I got to take my tongue out of my cheek here.
Go ahead.
It's Writer's Block on Sportsnet 590, The Fan. All right, well, the last time we had Keith Pompey on, we were discussing his article that got everybody in the city talking, suggesting that Kyle Lowry word had been out there that Kyle Lowry was interested in being traded to the Philadelphia 76ers if the Raptors were considering trading him, which made sense for a variety of reasons. He's a perfect fit. It's his hometown. Of course, immediately, you got to parse these things. But essentially, the suggestion was made that, things hadn't actually progressed that far after all. And, of course, there are people who wrote that and who said that, the chances of the Raptors trading Kyle are very slim, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that was before they were getting their ass handed to them by the Houston Rockets, and before Nick Nurse was melting down, and before Pascal Siakam and Nick Nurse were getting into it, and before the team had lost 8 games. And right now, every commentator, national commentator, wherever, you really do get the sense that the Raptors are actively listening, as someone described. That's my favorite word. They're actively listening.
So before what were they doing before?
Just sort of mildly interested.
Putting their fingers in ears and going, no,
right.
Not listening to.
Now, the conventional wisdom seems to be that the Heat, the Sixers, and possibly the LA Clippers would be the destination of choice for Kyle Lowry. Keith Pompey is a Sixers beat writer with the Philadelphia Inquirer, and he joins us on Writer's Block. Keith, thanks so much for doing this. Look, we talked about your initial reporting on this. It made a lot of sense, obviously. And it really does seem from a distance, doesn't it, as if, you almost get a sense in a lot of these things that once momentum gets going, there's almost an inevitability to it. And you just almost feel now as we sit here, just slightly more than 24 hours away from the expiration of the deadline. It really does seem as if Kyle Lowry is very much in play. And I would think Philadelphia would have to be right there.
Yeah, it is. And it's kind of like the last time when I came on the show and talked to y'all. It was one of those things where it's a matter of based on, what the Raptors want to do. Now, it looks like the Raptors are trying to, get rid of certain players. And with that being said, do you want like a guy who's going to be 35, making a lot of money when you're trying to rebuild a little bit? So the best thing to do is to try to get some assets for him. And, everything seems to be, is from what I'm hearing, and, anything can change, but what I'm hearing is between, the Miami Heat and the Sixers. The Sixers will afford him an opportunity to go home. They have the best record in the league. The Miami Heat is the Miami Heat organization is also Miami, living in Miami. And I expect them to make some more moves as well. So, it's two pretty good options for, a guy who wants to finish his career, being a contender, when the next 2 years are up.
Keith, part of the reporting the last 24 hours has been that Kyle Lowry is looking for a place, if he's dealt, is looking for a place where he would be able to sign for another 2 years, and get paid, probably a little less than he's getting. He's getting paid $30 million now, but let's say 2 times 25 for the next 2 years. That's part of what he's looking for. Does that kind of an arrangement beyond this season, does that make sense for the Sixers?
It depends on what you want to do. Like, here's the thing. It's kind of sort of, if you really want to win a championship, I mean, if you say to me, like, a guy 35 and he's going to make, $20, $50 million over his next 2 years, you will say no. But then also you look at the window, and, Daryl Morey is making $12.5 million. Doc Rivers is making $8 million. The reason why they're making so much money is because, they want to win a championship, the ownership group. And if you feel as if Kyle Lowry is the piece, then do it. Because, how many times have you heard of a guy getting paid and they win a championship, and then they have 1 year left, and then next thing you know, it's like, well, hey, look, yeah, he's making that much money, but he won a championship for us. So, it just wants to see how much the Sixers, are willing to win. Now, here's the funny thing, not really funny, but, you look at Miami. Miami they can do that because, they're expected to have a lot of cap space next year. So Miami's a team that if he says, this is what I want, I can see Miami saying, okay, let's do it. Because they want to get to a championship too, and they have a lot of cap space. So, the main thing is, are the Sixers going to be willing to match what Miami does?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and, your point is well made. When you look at Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris, you look at where the division is right now, and I mean, Keith, if you're the Sixers, you've got to be looking at this and saying, Boston's having a down year. Milwaukee, I'm not impressed with Milwaukee. I'll take my chances against them in the postseason. Mm-hmm. Brooklyn at some point is going to be Brooklyn. If you're the Sixers, you might as well be looking at this and saying, "There's opportunity here. Like let's take a run at this right now." And Kyle Lowry to me is the perfect guy for that situation. And you know what? It's almost you worry about it after you make the move, right? You worry about the offseason when the offseason comes. If you're the Sixers, that's the way I look at it, anyway.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. Now, here's the thing: the only tie-up is, just like Kyle wants to go somewhere, and he wants commitment from them. They will have to get commitment from Kyle too, because, even though his contract is expiring, Toronto's not saying, "Hey, we're just going to let him go now." We want something back. And if you get Kyle Lowry, and then Kyle Lowry decides to say, "Hey, you know what, y'all? It's been real. Thanks for letting me come home, but I want to go to Miami." And then next thing you know, that's when That's when president of basketball ops get fired. That's when crazy things happen.
Unless you win a title.
You know, when you invest in exactly. Oh yeah, like my man Kawhi. It's funny, but you know, the funny thing is that was great for Toronto, and there's going to be a lot of teams that try to do the same thing. And there's going to be a lot of general managers that get fired or president of basketball ops get fired because it's not all going to work out that way.
No,
you know?
That is true. That is true.
Yeah, no, look, I think, for business to get done here, I think, you know, handshakes and, you know, there would have to be agreements made beyond this season. That certainly sounds that way. Whether it's Philly or whether it's Miami, there's going to have to be more than a, you know, gentleman's agreement here. They're going to, you know, they're going to have to have there's going to be a de facto extension on there, isn't there?
Yeah, it's going to be that under the table tanking.
Exactly.
I mean, excuse me, under the table tampering.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's like, you know, the word is, I want to get a sense that this is something that they would want to do. But yeah, basically, you know, you're basically negotiating with people right now to seeing what are they willing to give. You know what I mean? Because, you know, Kyle, I hate to say it. I mean, if you're an exec, you know, Kyle holds all the cards right now because you can trade for him. And if he doesn't get that money, you know, he can try to go somewhere else that's going to give him the money. You know, so, you know, he holds all the cards. But I will say this, y'all. Like, I feel bad for Toronto because I feel like of most teams, of any team in the NBA, they were affected the most by the pandemic. I mean, think about it. When they started basketball up in the bubble, the Raptors have been away from home for almost a year. And, you know, I know you say they're playing in Tampa. It's beautiful in Tampa. But, you know, the thing is, it's going to, you know, if the frustration level goes up because every game you play is an away game. And I think that's contributing to the things that are happening. That's contributing to the record. That's contributing to the fire sales that they're trying to have. So, like, you know, I really feel bad for the Raptors because of any other team, it is affecting them the worst. And that's why we're seeing these trades about to happen.
You know, two of the names we hear as interesting the Raptors, probably no surprise given where they are and given what is going to happen in the offseason. But you hear Tyrese Maxey. You also hear Matisse Thybulle as being players who interest them. Now, it sounds as if the Sixers are reluctant to part with Thybulle, who most people seem to think is a premium defender and is going to be a premium defender. What do you think realistically the Sixers would be prepared to give up if, as you say, they know they can get Kyle and they have a nudge, wink, wink with him that there's a real good chance he's going to resign? What could you see the Sixers parting with, Keith?
You know, of course, I could see them parting with Maxey, who I think will probably be a pretty good pickup for the Raptors just because he's a combo guard. He's raw, but he has an upside. You know, I think that Mike Scott is a guy that they could part ways with. You know, Danny Green, I think you would have to add Danny Green in there. He's going to come back just because of his salary. He's making $15 million, so you're going to need that chunk. And then there's a guy that you could get if and only if the Raptors will have extra available roster spots. There's a guy by the name of Tony Bradley. He's been their starting center while Joel has been out. And the thing is, all three of those guys, Danny Green, Mike Scott, and Bradley, they all are on expiring contracts.
Yeah.
So these are guys that they're just basically freeing up space, and they could go after free agents next year. But, you know, the main thing would be, I think you have to add some draft picks in there, and then you have to have, you know, Tyrese Maxey in there to make it work.
Keith, really good of you to join us today. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks for having me, fellas.
Take care. Keith Pompey, Sixers beat writer with the Philadelphia Inquirer, who was kind of the first guy to wade into the Kyle Lowry.
He was.
And look, you know how Keith has been a beat writer for a long time. He's got sources in and around the Philadelphia basketball community. And you know that that's a thing with Kyle Lowry because he's a Philly guy. He's a Villanova guy. There is a Philadelphia basketball community, and that's why. when I hear reports like that, I always think there's a little element of a little fire as well as smoke.
Yeah.
And then it does, and everything we hear about the Heat's interest in Kyle Lowry, it focuses on Tyler Hero. That's who the Raptors want. Not surprisingly, the Heat would rather part with Duncan Robinson.
Well, and it's this, you do have to think of this as a three-way conversation, because Kyle Lowry's, the idea of, him getting another 2 years obviously changes what the return is for those teams, right? If you think you're trading for, I'm not saying it's Kyle Lowry for the rest of this season and then becoming a free agent has minimal value, or has some value but less value. There are teams, but there are also teams that are going to say, that might flinch at 2 times 25 for the next 2 years.
Now, I will say this: that would not appear to be the Heat.
No, they've got some flex right now.
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct.
And the other thing, of course, the Heat have is, and it's, and people can talk about this and say that you can use accounting tricks and to make it all even out in income tax, but no state income tax as well.
Yeah, no, it's Kyle Lowry's going to be able to dictate what happens here to a large degree.
Yeah, and there's nothing to say that Kyle Kyle goes to one of these cities and then moves on to the Clippers next year or something like that. And that's what I think Daryl Morey and people and the Heat people, Pat Riley. I mean, that's what they're looking at right now.
But that's a different equation if you're dealing for him for the rest of the season, and there is no under the table agreement versus dealing for him and him saying, look, I don't want to go unless I've got 2 years and two more years lined up here. So,
and you'd almost think if there was an under the table agreement, is something that would probably it would have to be done by now almost, right? With the trade deadline 24 hours, it would have to be done by now.
There would have to be handshakes before,
or handshakes, correct?
Yeah, it won't get done because that's illegal.
No, pardon me.
But it'll be This could be, I say, a very interesting three-way discussion that could fall apart on any one of those at any of the 3 points.
Brian Lewis is a former NHL referees, director of officiating with the league from 1989 to 2000. This Tim Peel stuff. Is he surprised by it? Is he surprised by the NHL's decision? Is he surprised by what we heard in that hot mic? Brian Lewis is next. This is Writer's Block. So we'll get to the bottom of this whole Tim Peel thing. Let's bring in Brian Lewis, former NHL official and director of officiating. And Brunt, I mean, I think people are, as I said, I understand why the NHL is doing what it's doing, but the level of surprise at this has surprised me, I guess. And, well, you know what? We'll bring Brian Lewis in. Brian, thank you so much for joining Stephen Brunt and myself. This is a bizarre story, to say the least. And, I mean, there are so many layers here. I want to get that right away with you. And I'm just going to ask you, keeping in mind that we don't know, we being the media, fans, we don't have the full context of that conversation. We just have a snippet on a hot mic. You've been in a position where you've obviously officiated games. Can you see, in your mind, can you imagine what Tim Peel was talking about?
Well, I've mulled this over since I first heard about it the first thing this morning, Jeff and Stephen. And my first reaction would be is, let's talk about the caliber of the game, the potential caliber of the game. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Just say New York Rangers playing New York Islanders, or Philly playing Washington, or Edmonton playing Calgary. Games that we could think of in advance, they're going to be tough hockey games. Mm-hmm. I don't need Scotty Morrison to call me and say, Brian, you better be ready. I am. So my intensity goes up a little bit, and therefore I'm looking for and want to maintain control from the moment I drop the puck until the last whistle is blown in the game. I don't sense this happen here. There's nothing to indicate that it was a tough hockey game, nothing to indicate it was going to be a tough hockey game. Two teams that are not in the playoffs, and it's one of those games you should enjoy. And by that I'm saying I think then this gets coupled with the fact all the years, whether I would be the boss or whether I'd be on the ice, the key word here is marginal penalties. We don't want marginal penalties in any game. The players don't want them. And whether scoring championships won on a power play goal, you can go on and on and on over things that may or may not happen. And I think here is that the one word that jumped out at me the first thing this morning here, I don't care whether you're doing a Pee-wee game in Georgetown or whether you're doing an NHL game in Toronto or wherever, the integrity of the officiating industry has now been put out in the front and out in the center, and as a result will be challenged. And I would say to you guys, if you refereed a game today, you're going to hear about this.
Yeah, I think it's a bad look, Brian. And I know, I'm just looking at the summary from that game because, I wasn't sitting and watching Nashville and Detroit last night, but it looks like nothing was going on in that game. It's not like he was trying to avert a bloodbath here or anything. It's, as you say, it's two teams that are, one that's by definition a non-contender. One's, fringy as a playoff team at best. There was one minor called in the first period. One interference minor called in the first period, and the Arvidsson penalty comes, 5 minutes into the second period, of a game where, there's nothing going on. Maybe we will never completely unravel the mystery of the why, but there's nothing looking down at that game where you say, well, maybe this is what he was thinking. It's just not there.
Well, also, Stephen, I look at it from another aspect as well, from a management position. I happen to have been the referee in chief the year we brought in the two referee systems. I'm aware of what the mechanics were then, and the mechanics are basically the same now. If Jeff Blair's refereeing and he's a referee on the north end of the rink, part of his role, part of his function is to stay with and watch the action area. The reality is he could actually turn a look at the corner and look at the boards with everything we're not supposed to do. But the thing with the ID being then, my fellow referee Stephen Brunt is out at the blue line and he can watch the rest of the ice. This is the action area. It's not his call to make. It's not as if he's out there with that you're out there with a rookie and you've got to cover for Jeff Blair because he may or may not have made this call. That's his call to make. So then I look at and saying, okay, to me there was a mechanical breakdown here. A mechanical breakdown in the fact we don't need somebody 65 feet 3 inches away to come in and make a call that the deep referee is supposed to be making. I looked at that and said, I don't like that. I don't even like it when I'm involved in university hockey today. But sometimes if it's a rookie referee and you may have the veteran who wants just to help to maintain law and order, this game did not need law and order. The players were doing that. Just to your point, Steve, when you look at the stats alone, these guys were playing hockey. Give them the puck, tell them to bring it back when the game is over.
Yeah.
And the other part of that, I just throw in here, in this day and age, there's microphones all the way around the building. Never mind the fact the officials have got one clipped to their lapel.
Yeah.
We should know better, guys. And I mean, I'm also involved in politics, and you guys in the sports media, there are things you can and cannot say. Most of them you can't say. And I think here, not only a bad choice of words, it just has implied something that our industry doesn't need.
What word in particular got your attention?
Well, I guess the part that, and I don't have them written down here in terms of I needed that penalty or I wanted that penalty.
Against a team, against a specific team.
All right.
Let me give you one of my personal examples. And I still hear from Nate Greenberg with the Boston Bruins from 15 years ago, who maintains that one night in New York Island that Brian Lewis called 6 straight penalties on the Boston Bruins. All right? And whether they're good or bad, who really cares? And my immediate reaction to Nate was then, and it was last week, then that means the next one is 7. Don't do it. Mm-hmm. All right, and that, so to me, it's the style of play that dictates here, and I see nothing in this game that says, whatever referee has to take over.
Do you think
the secondary part? So the style of play is one thing I've noted here. We can say here that he's lost a paycheck for 1 month because he was going to retire on April the 24th. The part that jumps out at me the most, after doing more than 1,000 games in the National Hockey League, traditionally, he would have a retirement event. He would do his last games. The hockey players would tap him on the butt cheeks and say, way to go, thanks, Tim, blah, 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 the whole bit. And I know that was scheduled.
Wow.
That will now not happen. that to me is the biggest kick in my backside that I could ever think of as an official.
Well, and you know, like I mentioned when I was talking to Steve, there's another official in the ice, and I've got to think the NHL talked to Kelly Sutherland. And, you know, it's one of those things we probably won't know exactly how it transpired, but that would certainly, like, I just don't think, look, I don't know any Tim Peel's personality, his history or anything, but I cannot imagine that the NHL would do this unless they have something.
Do a little bit of homework, gentlemen. Let's do it this way. First of all, I can guarantee you the National Hockey, with the war room being what it is and monitors and all that kind of stuff down there were no secrets. They would be well aware of what happened last night. I'm quite certain of that. Mm-hmm. And then when I read this morning that Referee Chief Steve Walkham and President Bill Daly were doing an investigation, I want to say within a very few hours, there was an announcement made, which I would say this, that Coley Campbell made, and to me those words are right on the money. For not only for what was done wrong, for what it implies, everything that we don't want in the officiating business. And I could cite to you, I sit here with a book called Impartial Judgment. I'd like to read a quote to you that I got from a Mendy Rudolph, who was a former NBA official, that I put on the back of my business cards because it's officiating at any level. And I simply point out here, it's very, very unfortunate. And a little bit of what I said before here, the most unfortunate part I find is the impact. I'll get over the fact that I'm missing a paycheck for a month. I'll get over the fact that I'm not with my buddies. But you know what the toughest thing is? This is what you're remembered for. And I think if we did a little bit of homework, we're going to find out that Tim Peel had his knuckles wrapped before for doing something he shouldn't have.
Yeah.
Right. I think it was with the reporter, was he not?
Yeah, we may, well, I was saying to Jeff earlier, Brian, like the swiftness with which the NHL acted here, that's not necessarily the way the league always acts. Like the fact that it took just a few hours for them to make this decision tells you something.
Doesn't that tell us a lot of homework was being done last night, probably virtually immediately? I mean, I'm guessing at that part of it, but I would think here that when things are that bad and the negativity is easy to I'll say jump on, and this is very much negative, and I'll just call it the officiating business in general. I don't care what sport it is you're doing here. And I look at it here, and I have a book called The Psychology of Officiating. What's one of the head titles? Integrity. And at the summary, the last sentence is call them as you see them. Well, that's fine. And we can say call them as they see them. But then when you couple that, had he said nothing, we argue about a good penalty, bad penalty, marginal call, and all that kind of stuff. That if you make a whole bunch of those, you're not working playoffs, which none of these things were going to be an issue because he was retiring on April the 24th.
Right.
So those aren't issues, and that's what I said before. I'll get over the 1 month paycheck that I lost, but the toughest part is to turn to my family and say, I'm sorry, you will not be coming to my final game because I've already had it. That, to me, is the most troublesome part.
Brian, let me ask you this, because I know that this happens in the NBA and it happens in other sports, but because I was trying to figure out, is there any way that an NHL director of officiating may have said to the officials before the game, hey, we're going to emphasize watching this right now, because look, these teams are playing a lot of games against each other. Something may have happened in a previous game, but somebody may have said something. I don't know. But would that happen? Would that happen where the referees would be told before the game by somebody, Stephen Walkham or somebody else, hey, keep an eye on this. This happened, whenever, March 6th, then we just want you to be aware of this?
But you know what it would be? It would just be a general terminology relative to the style of play.
Okay.
All right. And let's say it's a penalty-filled game between Edmonton and Calgary. And whether Scotty Morrison or whether I, as the referee-in-chief, would call somebody and say, you knew that already. As soon as you get your assignments, holy moly, this is not one here. This is not going to be a free ride to this hockey game. I got to work. I got to be ready. I got to be prepared mentally, physically, and all those kind of things before I get to the rink. And I want to be ready. And sometimes you can overpump. And then that's when you put your arm in there and you think, oh, God, I wish my arm would fall off, or can I suck the whistle back into or the noise back into my whistle, and all those things. Why? And on your way to the penalty box, the player may say, that's a bad call, that's whatever. He might be right. But the unfortunate part, that's a judgment call that I've made at the time. I don't recall ever giving a phone call to anybody and saying, you got to do this, you should do that. Now is not the time to be changing any tactics. The players are going to dictate how hard I have to work tonight. And in this particular case, there was no need to overwork. And as I said before, I talk about positioning and I talk about experience of one guy versus the other guy. None of these things seem to kick in here. And then couple it with what I would say is a bad choice of words.
Brian, really good of you to do this. Thanks so much. Terrific insight.
Anytime, guys. Feel free. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Brian Lewis, former NHL referee and director of officiating. There you go.
There's the voice of experience.
That is the voice of experience, and I love that line. It was not a game you had to overwork.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wrong. Maybe. Have a lot of baseball and hockey talk ahead. It's Writer's Block.
When you choose to work with a deadline for your entire working life, you got to be a little bit crazy. And crazy is great radio. This is Writer's Block with Jeff Blair and Stephen Brunt on Sportsnet 590 The Fan.
All right, he is host of Nothing Personal, the podcast at CBS Sports HQ. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only David Sampson. How you doing, sir?
How you doing today? You okay? Are you okay? Are you hurt?
No, I'm really good. Am I hurt? No, I'm really good today, oddly enough.
He managed the stairs all by himself today. Fine, he didn't fall.
Yeah, I was good.
His pinky's okay as far as we know.
Well, yeah. No, I'm the one guy here. Listen, man, I just keep, you know me. I just put my head down and go through it. Like I do. One thing I can do, I can play hurt. I can play hurt. That's when Brent, you have to admit it. You see me, I can play hurt.
But it has been a calamitous 48 hours around here.
Oh my
Mr.
God,
Sampson. Yes, as you alluded to.
Yeah, I mean, between the Pascal Siakam and the head coach getting into it, and the Leafs having a goaltending crisis. I mean, it's like everything that was going smoothly 3 weeks ago is now falling apart, and basically the entire sports landscape in Toronto right now is one big gigantic tire fire, which is of course the way we like it. So I got to ask you this. I want to talk to you about managing risk, because the story of Kirby Yates I find fascinating. We know the Jays were looking for relief help this offseason. That's obvious. We know they talked to Liam Hendricks. I don't know how long. I don't know how far down the road they got with actually offering a contract. Bottom line is they were looking for bullpen help. They settled on a guy who 2 years ago was lights out, but was coming off surgery for elbow chips. I believe it was elbow chips or fragments or whatever they're called. Now, Ross Atkins has admitted that they took a gamble, that it was, high risk and potentially high reward. We now know that Kirby Yates is done for the year. He's probably going to have Tommy John surgery. So here we are. The Jays have committed $5.5 million to a guy who won't pitch for him. They're going to be relying on a whole bunch of odds and ends in the bullpen. If you were owner of this team, would you and Michael Hill had made that deal, or any of your GMs had made that deal, would you say to them, that's an acceptable risk?
So here's how the conversation exactly went. The Blue Jays knew that Yates had failed the physical with Atlanta. They knew they were looking for bullpen help, and they gave him a physical. The doctor said he's got some fraying, he's got some UCL issues. Obviously, he's had one Tommy John. There's a chance he can get through 60 innings. The bone chips look like they're taken care of, but he's one pitch away. Mm-hmm. And then the GM says to the president, "Hey, they're all one pitch away. Let's see if we can get this guy." The president says to the owner, "I think we should try to get Yates, but let's go for a low base and super heavy incentives because we know he failed the physical. Let's let him make more than $5.5 million. Let's pay him $10 million. Do it $2 million guaranteed with $8 million in games finished incentives or even just appearance incentives, because that guarantees us that if he's not well and we should have failed him, that we're only in the hole for a couple of million, which is like signing a mediocre to terrible free agent and just having it not work out during the offseason, and that happens, and that's excusable."
Yeah.
When you get to $5.5 US, you don't do that on a player who has failed a physical and who you do not have a reasonable belief that he is going to help you during the course of the season. And with Yates, you're right. He was lights out, but that's not yesterday. But recency bias that owners have says that, hey, I know they had a bad year last year, but it was the pandemic, and let's talk about when he was last good because he could be that good again, couldn't he? How many times did I hear that in 18 years? I can't even tell you.
Yeah. Well, no, it's interesting. The risk reward thing's interesting though, David, because obviously, like the Braves were going to pay him $12 million, right? And then And then the first conversation with the Jays was at $8 million, and then where they decided it was acceptable risk reward was $5 and a bunch of incentives that obviously he's not going to make. But tell me something. How many when pitchers' medicals come in? How often is the conversation that it could be one more pitch or it could be 20 more innings? Like Masahiro Tanaka was one pitch from his elbow exploding for 5 years, right? Like, how often is that actually the conversation about pitchers?
So that's the other side that always happens. Do you remember a pitcher, Jeff, named Ugueth Urbina?
Yes,
he was
I do.
Expos with us.
Yes.
And then he closed for us in the 2003 World Series.
Right.
He couldn't straighten his arm. And we were told when we had him and then when we traded for him again during the deadline in 2003 that he's one pitch away. And when we looked at him, his arm was in a locked position. That's how his arm actually was during the 2003 entire second half of the season when we had him, because he had a chip that was lodged in a certain place, and we were told if that chip moves, then you're done. He's done. It's done. You will have traded Adrian Gonzalez and gotten nothing back. And we said at the time, but if his arm is locked but he's pitching, that's a risk we're willing to take because we have another first base prospect. His name was Jason Stokes, who ended up not being a thing, so it shows you how good I am. But you do risk according to where you are in the position that you're in. But during the off season, you're at a bit of a disadvantage because there is no track record of health during the course of a season. So you could have a pitcher say to you, I'm good. I've been throwing, and come look at me throw. And then you throw a bullpen, and you can winch your way through a bullpen. You get through a physical. The doctor gives you the risk reward, and you say, we're fine. But then all of a sudden you get to spring, you start ramping up, and then he's hurt. So we were less apt to take risks during the off season than we were during the regular season when we could look and say, hey, Urbina's arm can't extend, but he's been pitching for Texas, so let's hope he holds on for another 2 months. The off season's a bit more risky.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And, I would also think that, and look, I don't know if this is, I haven't talked to Ross. I don't know if this is part of his thinking as well, but it was an area of at least a little bit of depth for the Blue Jays, right, Stephen? There was. So if you're going to have it not work out, it's better that it not work out with him than Marcus Semien or somebody else. I guess my concern is, and I kind of blame myself for this because, we looked at the 60 regular season game Jays team that, quote unquote, made the playoffs last year. And maybe this is just kind of a reminder, David, that even though Mark and Ross can't come out and say this, they may view the 95 loss Jays of 2 years ago as being a little more of a representation where they are going to be this year. Not saying they're going to lose 95 games, but they might be closer to losing 95 games than they are playing 600 baseball this year.
I think everyone goes into a season assuming that you are way better than your worst performance the year before, and you're way worse than your best performance the year before. You try to middle it. I want to point out one more thing to the listeners, if you don't mind, which is the OPM concept. I worked for an individual owner for the 18 years, and I had to explain every dollar in, every dollar out, because at the end of the day, he's writing the check. When you have corporate ownership, it is easier. And I'm not saying that Mark does this. I'm not saying that Ross does this. But when it's not one person who you say, hey, we have a $5.5 million player. We really want to replace that money because he's out for the year. Can we have that back for the deadline? Look, we're in it. We're so close to making the playoffs. Right. Is that going to be okay? You have a better chance of getting that yes when it's OPM than when it's a man or a woman who says, I guess I have to take it out of my checking account.
Yeah, no, look, I'm sure that's true. Like, I'm 100% sure that's true. Like there's a whole bunch of variables, but that would be one. Again, the other, look, everything is everything's odd right now, right? So the stuff we're talking about is, we're talking about assessing a guy, coming off a 60-game bubble season, or a 60-game season, trying to project into, and even talking about stuff like adding a player at the deadline this year, David, from an ownership point of view. Tell me what your revenues are going to be. Tell me what the revenues are going to be if you're in a pennant race. Now, at going from, and this in terms of the local market, you're going from a team that has not set foot in this city, since summer camp last year, and you don't know when. You have no assurance that you'll be able to sell a single ticket this year. So, yeah, normally you would say, well, look, we get a pennant race in September. We've seen what happens. Look at 2015, 2016. The place is packed. TV ratings are through the roof. But the place is packed part of the equation. Can you guarantee that? I can't guarantee anything now.
I can almost guarantee the opposite. I think it's very likely that the Blue Jays will not be able to play in Toronto at all this season. I think that when you look at the border, while the vaccines are being rolled out a little faster than expected in the U.S., I'm not sure what's going on in Canada.
Neither are we.
Right. I think it's been a little bit slower maybe. And so I think that the Blue Jays are planning as though they may go from Dunedin to Buffalo instead of Dunedin to Toronto.
Yeah, that'll be step one. Now, I guess the flip side of that is they had a conversation with ownership in the offseason heading into a year when they didn't know if they could sell a ticket, and they got the green light to do the Springer deal, among other things. So, that would have been an interesting conversation with ownership as well.
I think the other thing you have to talk about is when you say the ratings are so good, when you look at ownership of the Blue Jays, I'm not sure that having great ratings, they would say will trickle down to the Blue Jays payroll. I think they keep that upstream. But, I'm just looking at what the Blue Jays have done year over year. But it's not as though those guys don't spend for you. And they signed the best pitcher of last year's free agency. Mm-hmm. I think the best position player of this year's free agency. They've got unbelievable young players that they've developed and drafted. And now if they choose right, which you and I, the three of us have talked about for a year now, if they choose right in terms of who they extend or who they decide to go with. What a great team. They just happen to be in division with the smartest team in baseball, and that's the Rays, and a team like the Yankees and Red Sox who go back and forth trying to outdo each other. So it's just tough positioning, but I love the Blue Jays team.
I'm interested in this story that Evan Drellich and Ken Rosenthal reported in The Athletic about Major League Baseball sort of having we're going to have the ball police now, I guess, if you want to call it that. And that's your guy Michael Hill. This is his baby, right? The new one of the VP of baseball operations, and they're going to be the ball police. They're essentially going to be keeping track of taking baseballs to an outside laboratory, which will track balls that test positive for substances.
Here's the best news. The best news, Jeff, is that you and I are going to get to pitch in the big leagues this year if they suspend pitchers for doctoring balls.
Well, look, this is the thing. One, it's one of those things where I think everybody does it. And two, I'm not entirely certain it's a bad thing that guys doctor balls. Is it?
No, it's actually, if you talk to, which is I did, I spoke to both pitchers and our hitters. Our hitters love that pitchers doctor balls because they don't want to get hit. And pitchers say if we don't doctor it, we may not be able to control where it goes. So the hitters are good with it. The other thing the hitters are fine with is getting down on the knob and hitting home runs and or striking out because they don't get a demerit for striking out. They just get a pay raise for home runs. The reason why baseball is doing this, it's all part of their, Theo Epstein-led, competition committee-driven increase in action and decrease in the true outcome of home run, walk, strikeout. And if balls aren't doctored, the view is that pitchers will have a harder time throwing moving fastballs, tighter breaking balls, and hitters do struggle with those, no doubt. They do. But I think that what's interesting is the timing of this announcement, and Mike Hill and I have been texting about it. The question will be, how is it going to be enforced? What are the penalties going to be? Is anyone actually going to care in terms of the union or the commissioner's office when they catch people? Because if it's just a letter that comes from Mike Hill knows what happens to letters that come from the old VP of on-field operations. We print them out. We put them on the chair in the locker of the player, and then they get moved inside the locker, and then they get thrown out.
Yes.
I do like – I am intrigued by the idea that they're going to monitor spin rates, though, and try and look for strange, unusual variances in spin rates to suggest when substances may be using or baseballs may be doctored, that they're going to try and use the science. Now, again, I don't know where you go once you see somebody's spin rate unusually improved over the course of a game or over the course of a year or whatever they're going to do it, but it's intriguing that they're going to try and turn the technology on in the service of investigating cheating.
it just feels like eyewash to me because you buried the lead a little bit by saying, I don't know where this is going to go. Well, isn't the point of anything you do to know where it's going to go?
Yes, mostly.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Know the means of your end, then what are you doing?
Yeah. Well, I just said intrigued. That's a half-hearted commitment. Okay.
No, but it is. It's just I don't know. Look, I am willing. I am willing to go along, David, with the idea that there are some holistic things you can do. I hate that word, but some holistic things you can do to speed up the play. I mean, whatever, not speed up the play, but put more stuff in action. I'm willing to go along with that. That's fine. But Jesus, I just think the more texture you add to this thing, the more it's just you're going to have a bunch of people just kind of shrugging their shoulders and saying, "What the hell? What can we do? What can't we do?" You know, and I'm especially not a big fan of announcing this with a week left in spring training. You're going to do it at the start of the spring training. I just don't get this whole idea that it's like we've got all these vice presidents of baseball operations. And look, I love Michael and Raul Ibanez and all those guys. I understand they're good people and all that stuff. But it's almost like we got all these people and they feel like they have to do something. It's like work is being created. It's like Cuba. You know, work was performed.
Oh, God. So I would say that Mike is doing his job, and when he was told that this was part of his job, then he's going to do it as part of his job. And baseball has an overall goal, which is, as you said, to increase the action. But I think the biggest thing that we should be looking out for is related to the shift.
Mm-hmm.
If there is a rule that's made where two players have to be on the right side of second base and two infielders have to be on the left side of second base, that which thereby eliminating the shift. They dipped their toe in the water this year in the low minor leagues where infielders can't be in the outfield grass, I think is one of the new rules in one of the lower leagues. But if they change positioning, that will then change how hitters approach their at-bats. That will then impact them going for only home runs. But the shift change I'm looking for, but also as part of collective bargaining, what are the criteria in arbitration? That's the other thing you should be looking for in terms of how the game changes. Because if they don't change the stats that are looked at by the arbitrators in order to form a ruling on the number given to a player or that the team prevails, then you're not going to see a change in how the players act.
And that's a great point because a lot of people don't realize arbitration, they use old school numbers, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, they do. Now, we argue new school, and so does the union, and they don't care.
Right.
It is really based on bulk, home runs, RBI, average. We do slide after slide about spin rate and percentage, batting average, balls in play. When it's in our favor, we say it is. When it's not in our favor, we ignore it, but then the player puts it in his presentation. We do all these technical things, and when we sit around at meetings, we would say we're not convinced the arbitrators care about any of it.
David, good stuff as always, my friend. Thanks for doing this. Take care.
Hey, have a good day, guys. Thank you.
David Sampson, host of Nothing Personal, the podcast at CBS Sports HQ.
And always fun.
Yeah, and a lot of people do not realize that arbitration. And let's think about this because a lot of players do end up going through arbitration hearings. It's old school stats. I mean, it is. We can sit here and say that pitchers wins and ERA and batting average doesn't matter. But it does to the guys that decide how much money you're going to get paid.
Well, it's part of the discussion when you talk about using high leverage relievers in high leverage situations where you don't get a save, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's great, and
it's what you should do.
It's what you should do, but the arbitrator doesn't give it. The arbitrator doesn't give a rat's ass whether you got an ERA of 1.85 with 50 saves, and I mean, they just don't. They don't. Leverage isn't a thing.
Yes. Okay, Blue Jays updates because it's important because if you're listening to us, you're not watching the game. 5-0 Blue Jays.
5-0?
Bottom of the seventh,
there you
2
go.
out. Socrates Brito came in for Aaron Judge. That tells you where we are in the game.
Socrates Brito, the next Gio Urshela.
Yeah. But 3 clean from Trent Thornton, 3 clean from Simeon Woods Richardson, and A.J. Cole throwing a pretty good inning right now, which I would think we're getting on to the does he have a job or doesn't he have a job moment for Cole, right?
Yeah. I spent a lot of time last night after the injuries came out and reading what people were saying, how they were splitting up the bullpen and roles, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm operating on the assumption that everybody in camp right now at some point is going to be pitching for the Blue Jays, more or less. There is a lot of bullpen depth there. There's no doubt about it. But and I've got to think. Again, we're not around the team, so we don't know. But I'm paying less attention to lefty, righty, et cetera, et cetera. I'm looking more at arm angles and funkiness. I think funkiness is something that is being looked at by this group putting together.
I think that's another thing that's changed, right? That you're going to have the 3-batter rule, number one, but so the loogie's kind of gone. But so many guys have reverse splits now. That's you really got to kind of go dig a little deeper. By the way, I just cursed AJ Cole. I just gave up a double to Brett Gardner, but
I'm sure he'll survive.
Well, again, I think he's one of the guys that benefits. Like somebody was not going to have a chair in that bullpen before the Yates injury, and you got a couple of you got some roster decisions here in terms of the 40-man, and you got like a guy like Tim Meza because he has options, although he's pitched really well. I don't know if he makes the team now. Mm-hmm. He's pitched well enough to make the team, but you got Liriano, you got Cole, you got some guys you got to make decisions on.
See, I am not at all concerned about losing a Reese McGuire on waivers or a Breivik Valera on waivers or anything like that. I am concerned about losing a pitcher on waivers. If I've got waivers on a pitcher, I want that guy in the organization still. I really do.
I don't think you want to lose any arms on waivers this year. You're bang on. The Reese McGuire one's going to be tricky because if it just leaves you without a safety net, and so there's going to be an interesting roster move there because. Kirk's won the job. Kirk and Jansen are your two guys opening day.
And we are led to believe that you need a catcher, an emergency catcher.
You've got to have, right? Because otherwise, we were talking about this before the show today. Otherwise, in the organization, they got a lot of catchers, but they're young.
Right.
So would you be comfortable with Riley Adams catching for the Blue Jays this year?
Yeah.
No. And I would say no, but there's nobody else. So they don't have that guy, the crusty veteran guy. So what they are going to probably start looking for if they can't.
Jeff Mathis is out there.
He wouldn't take a minor league deal though, would he?
Depends how much he wants to stay in the game.
Yeah. Well, he just got he had one of those put up or shut up dates with the Phillies.
Yes, he did.
And he would be the ideal guy. He would be absolutely the Caleb Joseph of this year, but I don't know if he takes a minor league deal. So, but you need somebody. They need somebody on that taxi squad on a minor league deal who has caught in the big leagues before, if you're going to risk losing Reese McGuire on waivers, which, the other options carry 3 catchers for the beginning of the season, which you don't want to do. And then try and sneak them through a weekend or 2 weeks in after other rosters are set. So it is a little bit of a tricky situation, but, in terms of allaying any doubts and fears, Alejandro Kirk's kind of done that, I think, this spring.
Yep. No, I think he has as well. Nate Duncan is host of Dunked On. And Hollinger and Duncan, he's an NBA salary cap expert. We are now less than 24 hours away from the expiration of the NBA trade deadline. What's the chatter around the Raptors? Let's take a national perspective. Nate Duncan joins us next. This is Writer's Block. So the latest on the Raptors as we approach the NBA trade deadline continues to be that the Miami Heat and the Philadelphia 76ers are the teams most interested in Kyle Lowry. You hear the LA Clippers in there as well. And there are reported to be more teams interested in Norman Powell. Let me rephrase that. It appears as if Norman Powell, there is more of a fit with more teams. Does that make sense? There's more of a fit with more teams for Norman Powell than Kyle Lowry. And it was interesting because Julio Routen's talking a little earlier today, and he was discussing Norman Powell. And of course, we've talked about what a good run Norman Powell has had. And Leo made kind of an interesting point. And I think it kind of gets to what Norman Powell is. And Leo's point was, Norman Powell is playing now as well, if not better, than he's ever played. Mm-hmm. The team is not winning. Think of the number of shots Norman Powell has taken that have won games for the team. And Leo wasn't trying to slag him, but Leo's point was he's been a very good player.
Yes.
Carries you to where exactly? And I think what Leo was essentially trying to say is don't overvalue Norman Powell. if you are the Toronto Raptors. Now, a lot of focus, obviously, has been on Kyle Lowry. I'm interested in what Norman Powell is. What does the NBA, the wider NBA, see when you say the name Norman Powell? Nate Duncan is host of Dunked On and Hollinger and Duncan. And we're very pleased that he joins us in Writer's Block. Nate, thank you so much for doing this. Before we talk about Kyle Lowry, what is Norman Powell in your mind? You know, you're an NBA executive and your team, you're interested in Norman Powell. What are you looking for? What do you think you're getting? What are you willing to give up maybe to get him?
Yeah, Norman is a fascinating player. I always like to say that his value relative to his contract has yo-yoed probably more than any player that I can remember. First, he was on that great rookie deal as a second-round pick, and he's one of the most underpaid players. And then he signs that extension. He has a bad year. Then he's overpaid. Then he's all of a sudden underpaid again, and they win the championship. Then he struggles a little bit at the start of this year, and you're like, oh, man, he's going to opt in. And now he's been incredibly efficient. You know, I was surprised, though, as I often am, to see Zach Lowe say, well, there's an expectation that he's going to get $20 million a year off of that contract when he declines his player option. And you mentioned what Leo was saying about him. For me, what is he on a good team, right? And I think probably a pretty decent answer to that is kind of what he was last year for the Raptors in the playoffs, where he can be an X factor. He can come in, he can score, he can defend his position adequately, but not amazingly. And he can shoot when he's off the ball, but he really doesn't rebound. He doesn't pass. And he's not a guy who's driving efficient offense for your overall team other than just converting the opportunities that he has and that he creates for himself. So if you have a good team, you know, I'm thinking of him as maybe a third scorer type, maybe even a more of a bench guy than a guy who's, this is one of our top two players.
Yeah. So how does that kind of like that's that is kind of an obvious opt-out for him, obviously, at the end of the season. You know, like as you say, he's kind of, you know, in terms of the yo-yoing of the contract, whether he's a $20 million guy or not, it makes sense for him to opt out at the end of the year. But what does that make his value right at this moment, as we're, you know, almost exactly 24 hours away from the trade deadline?
Yeah, I think it depends on what team you're talking about. If you are a team that feels, you know, and Philly has been bandied about for him, that feels like, hey, we need just one more score to bolster our offense, and that could make the difference for us in making a deep playoff run or not, then I think he has a lot of value to you. If you are a team that is over the salary cap and you want to re-sign him, and you can do that with bird rights, whereas you couldn't sign someone like him because you don't have the cap space, then he's got value to you. If you are the Toronto Raptors, who probably at 17 and 26 are not going anywhere this season, then you think about, what are we if we re-sign Norman Powell after this to the $20 million a year that apparently he's expected to get? What does that mean for our long-term salary structure and our long-term plan, as maybe we're trying to move into a new era? So I think for the Raptors, it becomes a relatively easy decision to at least gauge the trade market and see what may be out there for him. If you're a team trading for him, a lot of his value is wrapped up in the fact that he can help you this year, and then he gives you a player that you couldn't get otherwise unless you trade for him now by signing in free agency.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking as you were talking, you know, Major League Baseball, there's analytics has advanced so much now in baseball that, you know, there's a dollar value attached to each win above replacement, you know, which is not, I mean, that's not earth-shattering. I mean, there are many more earth-shattering things about analytics than that. But bird rights have a value in the NBA, do they not?
No, they do, but really, you know, for teams that are really trying to win now, and right, teams that are willing to spend into the luxury tax, that's where your value is that you can re-sign this guy in a way. And my colleague John Hollinger calls it the bird rights transfer. Now, you've got this guy, you can let him leave for nothing, but then all you have is a small exception to, or you can pay him a lot. And that's where you want to be as a free agent, as a team that has your bird rights and needs you, because they kind of have to overpay to keep you because you know that they can't replace you at all.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there? I want to flip over to Kyle Lowry because that's obviously is really front. That conversation is very much front of mind here right now. When he talks about again, one of the things many things have been reported in the last little while is that that he wants to go somewhere. He thinks 2 years times 25 after this year. That's his what he thinks his market value is going to be going forward, and that he wants to go to a place where he would like to go to a place where that is possible, where that where that kind of arrangement could be made for the following 2 years, so he kind of knows where his future is as well. At Kyle Lowry, 2 times 25 after this year, how many places would that work? It seems that it might work in Miami, but does that work anywhere else?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I think that's a reasonable expectation of what he can expect, in the $50 to $60 million guaranteed range in his next contract, whether it's over 2 or 3 years. Miami is interesting because they actually have salary cap space this offseason. Now, they certainly would really like to have Kyle Lowry for this season so they can be a better team with the Jimmy Butler a little bit older, Goran Dragic a little bit older, if they could retain him without having to trade him for Lowry. So he's got a lot of value there, but then the Heat also could sign someone else with their $23 million in cap space rather than holding on to Kyle Lowry. Philly is well over the cap, and so they're in a much better situation where they couldn't get someone of Lowry's caliber. It's that same bird rights trap that we were talking about earlier. But the way that Kyle Lowry has played this year, absolutely, he is well worth that. I mean, if you look at the point guard market, guys like Malcolm Brogdon and Fred VanVleet, I think Lowry has certainly played at the level of those sorts of players. That's a solid starting point guard is getting $20 million, and Lowry might even be better than that still at this point. Now, you expect him to age, but guys generally are getting paid for what they're doing right now. And so, yeah, I think that is realistic for him, but probably more realistic in Philly maybe than Miami, who might have other options as well.
Nate, who is the most interesting team as the trade deadline, approaches? I mean, obviously in Toronto, we're going to focus on the Raptors, but is there a team you're looking at that you think could be maybe unexpectedly bold?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Unexpectedly bold. I don't think that there is. I think it seems like much of the trade market has been sussed out here. I think it's really more about, there are probably more buyers and fewer sellers than there have ever been, in part due to the play-in and just the weird nature of this season. And teams just generally seem to value winning now a little bit more than they have in the past, when Golden State was viewed as this impossible dynasty to overthrow. So, no, I mean, the more interesting teams to me are you going to be a seller or not? And obviously the Raptors, to me, are probably the most interesting. They got 2 good players in Powell and Lowry that they could look to move or they might not. And just their overall status as a franchise, like, are they going to totally rebuild? Are they going to just kind of keep this group together and say, hey, this year was just a weird year, we can be better next year? It's very interesting. If I were in their position, I would have a very difficult time deciding what to do myself.
Nate, really good of you to join us today. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks for having me, guys.
Nate Duncan is host of Dunked On, and Hollinger and Duncan, he's an NBA salary cap expert. Terrific insight on just the actual value of bird rights and what the Raptors ought to be looking at.
And I think they, I obviously our viewpoint is the viewpoint from here, but I think they are actually the most interesting team at the deadline right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back to previous NBA trade deadlines, and I guess the point is, I look at it just seems to me that, and I guess we really won't know about the West until we have an idea when LeBron is, the extent of LeBron and AD's injuries. But man, it just seems to me that there are teams that have got to be, and I look at the East. If I'm in the East right now, I'm almost assuming that we are on we're on the verge of just having the Brooklyn Nets run roughshod over everybody.
Yeah,
and react accordingly.
Maybe. Oh, well, I think the couple asterisks. One is we'll see where Philly winds up here, because Philly with Kyle Lowry would be a pretty interesting team.
But they seem to be the team, doesn't it? And the teams in the East, Stephen, and you look at them.
I want to see more of Milwaukee with Drew Holiday.
Okay,
because I think
that's fair.
Because remember the last they have been playing really well with him.
Yes, they have.
And the last time we saw him in terms of the Raptors, he was barely back.
Yeah.
So
that's fair.
I think that's something we got to see a little more of. But yeah, otherwise, I think it's and we'll see what likewise if Kyle Lowry winds up with Miami, that gets interesting as well. I don't know what's going on with Boston. They're just there's just something wrong there right now.
I mean, I think you started to hear about 2 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, you started to hear rumblings about Brad Stevens being connected to the Indiana to college coaching gigs. I think everybody agrees that Brad Stevens is a terrific head coach, but at some point you got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if maybe we're not in a situation right now where the Celtics really need to take a deep look here, because it hasn't worked with guys like Kyrie Irving. It hasn't worked with homegrown guys. It hasn't worked with the Tatums and the Brown. It just hasn't worked. For whatever reason, it hasn't come together. And, and maybe you need to take a look at how Danny Ainge does things too. I don't know. That team is more puzzling to me than any team in the East.
Yeah. No, I thought they're on the verge.
I felt they were on the verge going back 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I thought they were on the verge. And for whatever reason, it almost seems as if they can't get out of their own way. And I know that sounds really general and kind of trite, and it's a handy sports writer thing to say, but it really does seem to be the case with the Celtics. It's like somebody always does something to mess it up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, we will take a break. This is Writer's Block on Sportsnet 590, The Fan. So I was listening to a Fangraphs podcast a couple of days ago, and it was Jason Stark of The Athletic and Tyler Kepner of the New York Times, Stephen, and they were talking about, well, Jason in particular was talking about media access coming out of the pandemic, and Jason's one of the point people for the Baseball Writers Association of America when it comes to media access. And I mean, this is going to, and I think it's for listeners or readers. This isn't so much inside baseball, because I think it has an immediate impact on what you read, what you see, and what you hear. But we've talked about since the beginning of the pandemic, when clubhouses were closed down and media access was restricted, that I am not entirely certain that we are going to go back to the glory days where if you were a reporter, you had access to the clubhouse half an hour before the game. You had access to the clubhouse after the game. As long as you had a media pass, you could go in within that allotted time.
Yeah. If
you wanted to talk to somebody and he was there, you could talk to him. You could basically hang around the clubhouse if you wanted to until your guy came out. And of course that went by the wayside with the pandemic and the first the distance restriction and then masking, and now of course we've seen Zoom calls. But it was interesting hearing Jason talk about this, because Jason's covered baseball longer than I have, so he's really old. And he made the point that, and he wasn't just talking about baseball reporters, he was talking about media in general. We're going to have to do a real selling job to get access to the players the way we used to have it.
Yeah.
In baseball, at least, it's collectively bargained. And we know that a new round of CBA talks are coming up. And in the past, when Bud Selig was commissioner, it was never an issue. I always tell people this. Every CBA, the general managers would ask that clubhouse access be restricted. Basically, clubhouses be shut down. And every time Bud Selig would go, no, we can't do that because, we get all this added PR, and he had a lot of free advertising. And Bud was an old school baseball guy. Bud liked the writers.
He was that. He used to hang out in the press box.
Bud used to come in the press box and bust your balls about stuff. I mean, he and Tom Hodricore, their back and forth was legendary.
Yep, the old Milwaukee press box. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes.
So, and Rob Manfred's a little different.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I think you're going to see happen when it gets what is something that players and owners / management could agree on? Probably if you needed to find common ground on something, it would be eliminating or limiting media access to the clubhouse. Because the players, they really don't want you poking around. They're not, there's this notion out there that, it helps because you tell stories, you personalize things. I don't think the players care about that anymore, about their stories being personalized. They control their social media.
Yeah,
there are other outlets, right? Like our friend Mr. Moore's...
The LeBron's thing,
the LeBron thing,
yeah, and there's the Players Tribune, and there are things like but guys are controlling. Yes, there's a couple of things, two different things going on. One is that players have got platforms that they can do things on their own, and they're on their own terms, right? So they can get their message out. They don't need to go through the kind of legacy media.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something. I hope people this spring. There's an intense amount of interest in Toronto Blue Jays in this market. It's huge, right? It's. Compares to any baseball market in North America, I would say. I hope people notice the difference this spring, because you know what? We're there's nobody down there covering this team because of the pandemic, except, Ben Wagner on the periphery down there for us. There's obviously no clubhouse access. There's some Zoom calls, but that's it. That's as close as we get to anybody. And the kind of conversations that happen naturally in baseball when you're covering it, that lead to information being exchanged, that lead to stories or lead to insights into people and what they're like, those aren't happening. So there's a layer of coverage that cannot happen this year.
Yeah.
And there's a texture to the coverage that is absent. And that is not the fault. There's great baseball writers and great baseball reporters on all platforms in this market who do a tremendous job. But they can't really do that job this year in the same way. And I hope people out there who are Jays fans say, man, I'm missing something. Because if you don't, get used to Zoom. You're right. If it doesn't make a difference, if there's no need for it, or people don't feel the desire to learn more about a team that way, the other side's not going to help.
No, and my point is, I think we have this idea in this business. We're still attached to the sort of the romantic idea that Bo Bichette really wants that lovely in-depth story written on him.
Yeah, and sometimes it depends on the guy.
Do, but a lot of times they don't care because they're going to get paid regardless of whether or not flowery words are written about them.
Now, when we've done the Docs on guys, it has required a pretty big investment on the player's part.
But
right?
that's different because it's TV.
It's different because it's TV. You're correct.
TV is sexy.
Yeah, it's sexier for sure. They feel that way, and that has if we're going to do a half hour on somebody and get into their life and hang around with their parents and all that stuff. Yeah, they're invested in it. But yeah, that kind of stands separately. On a day-to-day basis, not so much.
Yeah, and I have to tell you this, the whole reporters in the clubhouse thing, at least from baseball, the turning point, the point Rip became a talking issue is when the Associated Press reporter discovered the what was it?
Androstene
Dione in
McGuire's
locker. And he was doing it, and I can't remember the guy's name. He's doing his job. But at that point, I can tell you, people in baseball started saying, okay, do we really need these guys and women? Do we need these people sort of poking around? What's the upshoot here?
Yeah, look, there have been levels of hostility towards reporters in baseball clubhouses going back to Babe Ruth, I'm guessing.
Believe me, I know.
And there are always some guys who are pretty hostile about it. But it's an important. I guess what I'm trying to argue for is the importance of it.
Yeah.
And I think from a fan point of view, you want to think of yourself as a consumer of entertainment product. You can think of yourself as a fan, but what comes out of those interactions, which sometimes are uncomfortable and sometimes the one side isn't that crazy about it, is actually part of what. It is as much a part of the experience as watching the ball game, right? It informs your fandom and the way you watch games and the way you think about the guys on the field that you see on TV or you see in the stadium. You understand them a little bit better. Yeah. So I think we have lost that this year through nobody's fault this year. It just, like, the world has turned on its head. But understand that something's been lost here.
Well, and I think that what we are seeing now with the Raptors is kind of instructional, because this story would not have developed this way had we been in kind of a regular media world.
You mean the Siakam story? Or
the Siakam story and Nurse and everything.
Yeah.
It would not. Somebody would have, it wouldn't. It would not have developed this way. So, anyhow, it was just something like, it was an interesting podcast, and Fangraphs is terrific anyhow to begin with, but Jason was really good. Was really good on it, and it just kind of made me thinking, or got me thinking, because it's something that I've thought about in recent years, that there's sort of these little areas are cut away. The amount of time allowed is cut away. The access around the batting cage sometimes gets cut away. We talked about hockey, right? There's the Potemkin dressing room, as you call it, the fake dressing room you see after the game. The real dressing room is in the back.
Yeah, they don't let you near the real dressing room anymore.
They don't want you near the real dressing room in any stretch of the imagination. But anyhow, Jason York will join us. We'll continue our discussion about Tim Peel. Look at the Senators. Look at the Canadians. Look at the Leafs as well. This is Writer's Block on Sportsnet 590, The Fan.
Expanding on all of the top sports headlines. This is Writer's Block with Jeff Blair and Stephen Brunt on Sportsnet 590 The Fan.
All right, welcome back to Writer's Block at Sportsnet 590 Fan. So we had a discussion with Brian Lewis in the first hour about the Tim Peel incident, which is sort of driving the discussion today as we await the expiration of the NBA trade deadline, which is now less than 24 hours away. Of course, for those of you who don't know, Tim Peel was caught hot mic incident. Hot mics are just the worst. Having experienced the wonder of dropping an F-bomb with a live mic, they're just the worst. But this is different.
Well, it's also a very quiet arena.
It's a very quiet arena. Yeah, exactly. Very quiet arena. And anyhow, and it was a bad sort of culmination of things. I mean, Tim Peel, who's a month away from retiring anyhow, getting caught on a hot mic suggesting that he felt he had to call a penalty because
against a specific
team against Nashville at a specific time because
we ...
So, needless to say, the NHL did their investigating and as you know, everybody has said, moved with remarkable swiftness.
Quickest investigation in NHL history,
probably.
Oh, easy. I think this is. It's not even close.
Anyhow, so Tim Peel is no longer an NHL official. He might, as a matter of fact, have a better chance of being an NBA official than an NHL official from this point on. He has been removed, so he doesn't even get the wristwatch. He doesn't get the gold watch.
Nope.
As he skates off into the sunset, he gets the bum's rush more than anything else. So now the question is, I have to think that removing Tim Peel from this equation, while it is a very swift decision by the NHL, there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered here, I would think.
Yeah, they probably won't ever get answered. But I suspect a stern memo is going out to all officials in the National Hockey League, reminding them of a variety of things, including how microphones work.
Exactly.
I would think that there's some kind of stern talking to taking place right now.
And there is a heightened sensitivity around professional sports right now because we are moving into a period where we're going to have legalized gambling is going to be a corporate imperative. It's no longer going to be kind of the thing you may be interested in. It's an avenue of revenue generation for teams. It's potentially an avenue of generation for players as well. So legalized sports gambling is here. It's a real thing. And as you did say, you're going to get involved with legalized gamblers. You want to be able to convince them that your product's on the up and up and that the odds aren't going to be skewed by Tim Peel deciding that he had to make a call for some reason.
That he was bummed at Nashville for some reason. Yeah. Yes. Again, a random, perhaps the least meaningful game of this NHL season.
And I would just love to know the whole I would love to be able to hear the context of it. Because I still don't. Bottom line is we still don't know the reason. We assume that the reason the call was made. It makes no sense that the call should have been made for any.
There's no hockey
reason.
No. Again, I didn't watch the game. I know it's a terrible confession. I didn't watch Detroit and Nashville last night, but I did not.
Clearly, Tim Peel may not have been watching.
No, but in the first period of that game, there was, I think, one interference penalty called against the Detroit Red Wings. That's the only thing that's so. And then 3 or 4 minutes into the second period, he calls a tripping penalty against Nashville. Looks a little iffy on the replay.
Yeah. So we had a former NHL official and a director of officiating on, Brian Lewis, to talk about it. Let's bring in a former NHL player, Jason York. Jason, thank you for joining us. Jason York of Sportsnet. Look, I know from your days as a player, you were a responsible player. You were considered a bit of a leader, and I'm sure you had several discussions with referees, nice ones, bad ones, dull ones, in the course of the game. I got to ask you, what went through your mind when you heard that hot mic incident?
Who the heck left that mic on?
Well, beyond that, yeah.
Yeah, that would be the first thing, yes.
Listen, guys, like when I do games and we're doing color, we are told between intermissions, you're on a hot mic. There's always somebody listening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unfortunate. Like, let's be honest. These types of conversations go on all the time on the ice. And I coach junior hockey now, and I'll be doing a game, and a ref will make a pretty questionable call, and he'll skate by the bench, and I'll say, "You owe us one now," because that's how people in hockey think. And I didn't watch the game either, guys. I'll be honest. Detroit and Nashville wasn't on my list of games.
I think more of you, Jason, because you didn't watch it. Trust me.
and I heard you guys talking. Like, how could Tim Peel be pissed off at Nashville? Like, every time I go, I'm not sure if the game was in Nashville, but if it was, every time I go there, it's like the best place on earth. I'm so happy to go do a game in Nashville. But one thing, guys, and I've been thinking about this all day. I would have really liked to hear from Tim Peel. I know it's like just some kind of statement. You remember the call? I think it was Jim Joyce.
Yes.
Major League Baseball.
Anibal Sanchez blew the perfect game. Yep.
He blew a perfect game. Everybody was pissed off. Everybody was calling for his head. And then we heard from Jim Joyce, and it was such a humanizing effect on things. Is, hey, this guy's not that bad of a guy, and it kind of diffused the situation, at least a little bit.
Sure it did.
This leaves a sour taste in my mouth. I would have really liked to have heard from Tim Peel, because here's a guy that's going to retire this year. Now he's going to have a black stain on his career. There's going to be a little asterisk there, and that's too bad because he's a good person. He's a good referee. And, guys, reffing NHL, I'm not trying to make excuses, but reffing NHL hockey is one of the hardest things. It's one of the toughest jobs to officiate in all of sports. There's so much crap going on the ice. It's very, very difficult. A year like we've had with COVID, and all of a sudden, do we really need to roast another person and take them down and social media shame and all this? It's too bad. I would have liked to have heard from Tim Peel.
Well, he kind of roasted himself, right? Like, so there is that. Right?
But I think Jason's point is, and if you don't hear from Tim Peel, we are going to assume the worst. We're going to assume that it was gambling or something.
Exactly.
That's my issue, and that affects the other officials.
But it is, Jason. Like, I don't. Look, I don't think he was actually shaving, or trying to influence the game for gambling. But it is tricky. Like, if you kind of look at the context in that game, and again, you want to force yourself to go back and watch that game, but like, there's nothing going on, right? It's a nothing game between two nothing teams. There's only one penalty's been called in the game. And, because he, alludes to, a specific saying, I had to call one against team A, like it's hard to wrap. I can't come up with a kind of a real world scenario here. Again, I'm sorry. Like, I know their refs are human beings, and I know sometimes, we talk about game management and say, sometimes, or even it up, right? Okay, I blew that one, I missed that one. We know that happens. Yep. This one, though, kind of just stands out because there's no contact. There's nothing going on. It's that plus the fact that, and again, I don't know, it seems really telling to me, but the fact that the NHL wrapped up this investigation in like 12 hours, like that never happens.
Yeah. They had to, guys, and you guys touched on it at the top here with gambling now becoming ever more present in the sport, and there's all kinds of like that. They had to nip it in the butt. I get it. For me, I just look at it. I just think he let his guard down for a second. He let his guard down. You're in these buildings, and I've done games this year. There's no fans. There's no atmosphere. It's just him and the guys out there, and he did what many referees have been thinking over time. And before there were hot mics on the ice, I've had conversations with referees where they've said, I owed them one. You guys remember Paul Stewart?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
Stewie was fantastic. Because with Stewie, you knew if he called a suspect penalty against the other team, you guys were getting one later. You just knew it. That's how he did it, and that was his feel for the game. And it's become more robotic now. I've heard people say, I wish referees just call the rule book. Call the rule book, and there'll be no issues. That's easier said than done. With the speed that hockey moves at, referees are going to make mistakes every single game. They just are. They're going to miss stuff. There's going to be embellishments, and then they're going to watch it on video or whatever, and then they're going to try and make it up. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think he said, and he let his guard down at the worst possible time when he's on mic, and he said what many refs think all the time. He just went out and said it, and that's the problem, and that's why the NHL had to do it. I'm not blaming the NHL. They had to do it. I just think it's a real unfortunate thing to happen to a good guy and a guy that's obviously the NHL thought enough of him to have him referee for this long. Like, he just didn't all of a sudden become a bad referee overnight. He just made a really bad judgment call, and he let his guard down.
Jason, I'm wondering, as you got older, when you played and as you got older, what did your ability to forgive and forget refereeing mistakes get better? And I'm wondering, towards the end of your career, was there stuff you would see a referee do that would have just pissed you off in your first or second year that you kind of understood this was part of game management? And was there stuff, on the other hand, that would make you even madder, as you got on in your career? Like, what would drive you over the edge that a referee would do?
Well, consistency. And that as a player, as a former player, current player, coach, anybody involved in the game, that's all you want is consistency. When a referee wouldn't be consistent, that's when players would get pissed off, and you get ticked off. You say, well, what's the penalty? And then guys are confused. But as I got older, I'll tell you the truth, guys, I never had an issue with a lot of referees. Very, very few. I wasn't a guy that got a lot of PIMs. I wasn't a big yapper. Wasn't an agitator, and I just, I was more friends with them. My personal opinion of referees is the more you yell at these guys, the more you complain, the more you bellyache. They're more apt to give you something. And I coach junior now, and that's the way I coach. I try not to get on the referees. You try to get on their good side because they are human beings, and that's how I always dealt with them, guys. But to answer your question, consistency. Yeah. If they're calling it one way and all of a sudden they change, that's when they run into problems.
How has the two referee system changed? You mentioned Stewie, and you knew when he was refereeing, when I was covering, like he was, you're always going to get a show, right? Like the one thing is that Pulse, you would always know he was refereeing because he made sure of that. But if you think of those guys of that era, Stewie or Van Hellemond or Kerry Fraser, right? They were a one-man show. It's got to be different. The checks and balances with two guys have got to be different.
Steve, it's so different because you knew how the game, like when I talk about consistency, you knew it, and it would be different with each referee. They were going to call it a certain way, and to your point, we would look before the game, okay, guys, we got Stewie tonight. It's his show. Don't talk to him. Let him do his thing. Let him call a couple penalties early, and then we can play hockey. That's how we went about it. But I'm a fan of the one referee system because I like consistency. How do you get consistency when you have two different referees? Because everybody thinks, Well, just think when you're watching a game, somebody will think that's a hook, somebody will think that's a hold, and I still haven't figured out what goaltender interference is yet. It's crazy. So it's tough. I prefer the one ref. I know why they went to two, but it is what it is, and I think these guys do the best job they can, because hockey, to me, like I said, it is such a tough game to referee.
Let's shift focus a little bit and take a look at the Scotia North Division. I mean, you've had a chance to see these teams. Now, what's your read of it, and sort of what's your top line observation on the Maple Leafs right now? We know today that Freddie Anderson's out for a while. He's certainly not going to play on Thursday when the Leafs and the Senators get back at it. It's going to be Jack Campbell's net for now. What's your read on the Leafs, Jason?
I like Jack Campbell a lot.
Yeah.
I like the reaction of the night guys when they won and how they reacted to Jack Campbell. It looks like those guys really want to play for him. It looks like, and I've had goaltenders, it's not that you like them anymore. Well, you know what? Maybe you do. Maybe you do like them a little bit more. And I'm not saying that's the case, because I have no idea what's going on with Freddie Anderson and Jack Campbell. But I love that reaction, guys. And to me, he's a guy that's battled a lot of adversity, former first-rounder. I think he's 29 years old. Correct me if I'm wrong. He's a guy like Freddie Anderson. Obviously has great stats. I'm still not sold on him in the playoffs, guys. I just don't know if he's going to be the guy to take the Toronto Maple Leafs to the promised land. I'm not sold on Freddie Anderson. I know he's got great stats. He's got great numbers, but to me, I got a cloud of doubt about him in the playoffs. I obviously love their forward group. Their top-end skill is off the charts. Jason Spezza's had a real nice year. I love the Joe Thornton signing. I think they could use one more defenseman, one more guy back there that's reliable, that you just know is going to go out and defend, is going to be tough to play against. And we'll get in line. I know every team wants that. But I think the Maple Leafs could be well served to add a defenseman. I think that would go a great deal to help this club, especially come playoff time.
You talk about, we talk about this all the time about guys. You said the Jack Campbell does appear they really like the guy, and everybody says he's a great guy. That's kind of universal. But
yeah.
Kind of wanting to play for a goaltender. I've always understood watching how guys play, the sense of security when you know you got a great goaltender behind you. Like I always saw that when Hasek was playing it at his best, or when Carey Price is at his best, or when Patois was at his best. Like you could sense that, you knew that if something happened behind you, he was going to clean it up for you. But what, in terms of kind of a more emotional reaction to a guy, like what happens if you rally around a goaltender?
Yeah, I think with the situation, I'll talk about Campbell. I think you've had goaltenders where it's not that you're trying harder. It's just you're in the dressing room between periods. You say, like, boys, let's win this game. Let's win this one. Whether it's Jack's had he's had a good week of practice. Let's give him some support here. And you just know a guy's starting to make some headway in the league. And guys know that. Guys understand that. There's been goalies too. They're just real good team guys that are likable guys in the dressing room. And like I said, I don't know Jack Campbell. I get that impression just from the reaction, just from things you pick up and hear from people around the team. It goes a long way. In saying that, guys like Patrick Waugh, guys like Dominic Hasek, I'm not going to say they're not the most likable guys, but they were fiery.
Yeah, they were not. No, you can say it. They were like Dom is a strange dude, right? Like, and Patrick was. Yeah.
Well, he would call teammates out. And he would, like, it's not very often a goaltender calls out teammates. He usually sits in the corner and is quiet, and if he does talk, you say, "Shut up, your job's to stop the puck." But that wasn't the deal with Patrick Waugh. But he backed it up by winning. And winning solves everything. And when Waugh came to Colorado and did what he did, that just, it just put a postmark on his whole career. But it's, for goaltenders like Campbell, I think it goes a long way in the dressing room with the support of his teammates.
Jason, really good of you to do this. Thanks so much.
Hey guys, anytime.
Stay safe. Jason York of Sportsnet, and. It is. We kind of laughed a little bit about Jack Campbell and being well liked and everything like that, But that is very much part of the successful backup guy's characteristic is you got to be a likable guy. You got to know when to shut up.
Healy always talks about it, right?
Yeah, well, it's very
part of the
true.
deal. Yeah, and I think it is true. You've got to be like there are a lot of guys who are probably relatively equal, in terms of that gig. So if you're easy to get along with and the guys like you, probably helps.
And it's funny, I'd love to get. I always think about Cujo whenever I think about Leafs goaltenders because Cujo was painfully guarded, obviously. Yeah. And I remember we had him in here in studio one day and we were doing the 9 to 12 show, and he was
Was that his book came around? Probably when his book came out, right?
Yeah, and it was kind of interesting because it's kind of one of the few times I've seen him drop his guard, and I asked him about sort of dealing with the Toronto media, and he talked about how the one rule he had in this city, he said, I would never, ever even suggest that I was hurt if I was hurt. I just wouldn't. He it's almost it's not just simply dumbing it down. It's just I don't want to give anybody any little thread, anything that they can hang on to. And one of the things about Freddie Anderson, and everybody's wired differently, I don't know if there has been a Leafs goaltender that has been more willing to say that he doesn't feel good than Freddie Anderson.
Yeah,
to volunteer it. He's done it a couple times, and I'm not criticizing, but what I'm saying is, I've always remembered that in the back of my head, Cujo talking about that, and I wonder if that isn't part of the deal too. Just don't add to the drama.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Has he done that? Because he's a guy that
kind of volunteered that. Yeah, he volunteered here that he's feeling sore. Didn't feel 100%.
But he played through, or tried to play through concussion stuff, and he has had a lot of stuff go wrong.
But
right?
he's also there have been a lot of time, not a lot, but there've been at least 2 times that come to mind where he has kind of said, "I'm not 100%."
Yeah.
And I don't know if I need to hear that from my goalie.
Yeah, well, they would know. Like they know more than we know.
Right. But then do you want? The one thing you never want to do is say something that's going to force a teammate to answer for you. Say something so that the media go up to Dion Phaneuf or somebody say, Freddie said he didn't really feel all that well right now. Like if you noticed a fall off or anything, you don't want to ask guys about somebody else in the team.
Yeah, I guess.
You just don't.
Yeah, there's so little interchange anymore anyway, which goes back to an earlier conversation that I'm not sure when the last time I had heard anybody discuss anything forthrightly.
But he did recently. He just came out and said he's dealing with something. Yeah. And it was on a Zoom call. He didn't have to say it.
Yep. Yeah.
He didn't have to say it. Or even if someone asks you, lie.
Well, I'm not going to criticize him for being honest if that's what he did.
Oh, I will. I will. When it comes to an injury, oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, absolutely. Unless you're going to come out and tell me that, guys, I got to tell you this, but I blew my knee out 3 weeks ago and I've been playing on one knee. That's okay, but don't kind of tell me, I'm dealing with something. No, don't tell me you're dealing with something. Unless you're going to tell me what you're dealing with, don't tell me you're dealing with something. Anyhow. That's kind of an old reporter thing, I guess. It's kind of coming out. Ken Rosenthal had a relatively interesting article he always has interesting articles in The Athletic, but his article about the Kirby Yates, about who knew what when with Kirby Yates. I mean, it didn't remind me completely of Mike Sorotka, but you remember Mike Sorotka, right? Remember David Wells, Matt DeWitt traded to the Chicago White Sox for Brian Simmons, Kevin Byrne, and Mike Sorotka.
Good for you for remembering all those pieces.
Who showed up, and I remember because it was one of the first, I think it was one of the first sort of Jays stories I wrote for the Globe. The trade was made, and, he never pitched.
No, damaged goods.
It was damaged goods. And Gordash believed that Kenny Williams, then the Chicago White Sox general manager, that he didn't turn over all the information pertaining to Sorotka's shoulder. Ash appealed to the Major League Baseball Commissioner's office, and that appeal was overturned. It's not similar here because Kirby Yates is a free agent, but it's just, he could become the most notable pitcher since Mike Sorotka to be acquired by this team and not pitch an inning for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess.
That's possible.
Ken Rosenthal's next. This is Writer's Block. All right, as I said, you can't really draw, even after I drew a parallel or some sort of parallel between Mike Sorotka and Kirby Yates. You can't, obviously. One was a trade, and the other is a free agent sign. But what I was getting at is Mike Sorotka famously didn't throw a pitch in anger for the Blue Jays after a trade. He showed up with a bum shoulder, and it was a trade that sent David Wells to the Chicago White Sox. So David Wells wasn't going to pitch her, but very least you could have gotten something useful.
It's amazing that
healthy.
that went through. Like, you think about it, that somehow on the plane from Chicago to Toronto, Mike Sorotka could no longer pitch, and that was allowed to stand. Well,
my recollection of it at the time was that the Jays under Gordash were trying to, they claimed that Ken Williams and the White Sox had, either it wasn't that they hadn't passed over the full medicals,
right,
or they were dated. And it's been so long ago. But again, the fact is the trade was made. Mike Sorotka, I think the last time Mike Sorotka pitched, he gave up a home run to Garth Brooks in a spring training game. Garth Brooks was with the Padres, was doing one of his things. And the reason I mention that is because Kirby Yates was signed as a free agent in the offseason. You know that, $5.5 million. He was, our understanding was that he was healthy enough that the Jays thought he would be able to be their closer. We didn't see him pitch in spring training, but we were told he's on his own program and all that. And that's fine because closers quite often are on their own program. Well, we found out a couple of days ago that he had elbow soreness. And then we found out yesterday, it was a pronator elbow strain. Then we found out yesterday that he will need Tommy John surgery and that he will not pitch for the Blue Jays this year. And that's $5.5 million dedicated to a closer who won't pitch for your team. Now, that's not good.
No,
but it happens.
Yep.
Our next guest, Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic, and we're very pleased that he joins us because we know he's always busy, and two, he's busy at this time of the year and this time of the day. So, Kenny, we really do appreciate you joining us. Reported yesterday that, in fact, the Atlanta Braves had looked at signing the very same Kirby Yates for a lot more money, but they didn't like what they saw in the medicals. He failed his medical, and so obviously they didn't sign him. The Jays did end up signing him for considerably less. And Ken, thanks for doing this. I guess that kind of explains why he went from expecting, or we went from hearing you might get $12 million to signing for five and change and a bunch of incentives. But I guess the question Jays fans are asking is, should the Jays have just zeroed in on somebody else all along and tried to get another closer in here? Like, I understand Ross Atkins said high risk, high reward, but, there's no reward, as it turns out.
Well, a couple things here, Jeff, and it's a very good question, a fair question that fans are asking. And the first thing is, the Jays, too, are going to pay him a lot of money. He agreed to a deal that was worth $8.5 million after the Braves deal fell through, and then the Jays reduced the guarantee to $5.5 million after their physical raised some concerns of their own. So they were fully aware. They were aware that he came back to them after the Braves thing fell through because he had been talking to both the Braves and the Jays. They were aware of the physical because they gave him one themselves and saw things that bothered them enough to reduce the guarantee in the proposed deal from $8.5 million to $5.5 million. Their position, as Ross Atkins said yesterday, was it still was a risk worth taking because they believed if Yates was healthy, then, man, they could have been getting the guy who had 41 saves and a 1.19 ERA for the Padres in 2019. Obviously, that decision backfired. It did not work out for them. Could they have gotten Trevor Rosenthal or Mark Melancon or someone else? Sure, they could have. But this was the route they chose, and in this case, it just didn't turn out well.
Yeah, it's the very definition of a calculated risk.
It's not like they were unaware of this. That's the one thing that needs to be told here. That they knew, but they just felt, okay, let's take a shot.
Well, as I say, it is literally a calculated risk, and the calculation was that at $8 million, well, for the Braves of 12, it wasn't worth it. For the Jays at 8, after they saw the medical, it wasn't worth it. But it got down to 5.5, and they said, it's like but if you do that, Ken, of course, you're also willing to, the downside risk is there, right? So $5.5 million is is something they were willing to live with potentially losing for nothing, or investing in a guy who wasn't going to do what they had hoped they were going to do, and they were willing to gamble that against the possibility of getting a bargain.
Right. And again, teams make decisions like this all the time, and they either work or they don't. Yeah. And you could say, well, if the Braves thought the risk was too great, and if the Jays at least identified the risk enough to reduce the guarantee, wasn't that an undue gamble to take? And that's a fair question, too, because there was information to suggest that this very outcome could happen. But they clearly weighed the cost-benefit analysis and came to the determination that this was the way they wanted to go, believing the upside was worth the risk. Turns out it wasn't.
Pitcher medicals, there have been great advances in sports science over our lifetimes, but it is not a fully exact science, is it? I talked about it earlier in the show, but I remember all the talk about Masahiro Tanaka's elbow and how he was one pitch away, but he was one pitch away for his entire career with the Yankees, and kept pitching. What people see in pitchers' elbows and trying to understand how long they are going to be able to withstand the unnatural force being applied to them by throwing a baseball. There is some calculation and some guesswork involved, is there not?
No, that's a great example, Tanaka. And there are others as well. You just don't know. And again, as with anything, it's a risk-reward equation. And the Jays are not dummies. They knew that they were taking this chance, and they just simply decided, okay, we'll take this shot. And maybe they had medical information suggesting it's, yes, a risk, but, yes, it's equally not a risk. I don't know exactly what it was, but I know some fans are upset with them and mocking them and saying they should have used the money elsewhere. Well, they spent a lot of money this winter, and they were willing to take this kind of chance with $5.5 million. I don't know that we can accuse them at this point of not being willing to spend. Can you say, hey, they made a poor choice here? Sure that you can say that. But who knows? They could have signed Trevor Rosenthal, and Trevor Rosenthal could have blown out tomorrow. But the fair thing to wonder about here is, okay, knowing all that you did, why not just go a safer route? That's the one question that I had. And listen, they just feel otherwise. They just feel it was, again, a worthwhile gamble.
One of the things Ross Atkins said yesterday after announcing this was he said he didn't say they're back in the market for pitching, but he said they are going to be, basically he said they're going to be monitoring the market for pitching. That doesn't mean they're going to go out and add Luis Castillo or somebody like that. But the senses between Pearson's setback, this injury, and maybe to a certain degree Thomas Hatch's situation, that the Jays do need, quote unquote, more pitching. Is there somebody or some team we should keep an eye on, Kenny, in the first couple of months of the season that might be willing to part with a fairly significant pitching piece in return for, one of the Jays' top prospects, not currently at the major league level, or for some combination of Lourdes Gurriel Jr. plus another prospect?
First off, Jeff, I thought they were short pitching even before this situation occurred. And their rotation, I don't know, is strong enough. And their bullpen certainly now, yes, they've got some interesting pieces out there, but they now lack a lockdown guy in the end. And you don't have to have that. Teams win without that, but you prefer that kind of guy is on your roster. So for me, I thought from the very beginning of this spring training that this was an issue that they should address. I thought Odorizzi would have been a good choice for them if they were willing to spend that kind of money. So now, is there a team that you ask might be willing to part with a pitcher by the deadline? The Reds are certainly a great example. They talked all offseason about Castillo and Gray, didn't want to do it. But if they fall out of contention, they're going to be looking to save money. I believe they're going to fall out of contention. That is certainly one team I would identify. The Cubs, who knows where they go?
Yeah.
If they fall out of contention, Zach Davies is certainly a guy who could be available. They'll have other relievers besides Davies as a starter who could be available. And really, the Jays will have room to maneuver, and they'll have the ability to maneuver based on other teams becoming non-contenders and making their pitchers available.
Yeah, but that's probably, like history would suggest, that's a June conversation, isn't it? Right, when the market.
June.
Yeah.
Now sometimes trades do occur at the end of spring training. It's not out of the question. I'd be surprised, but as Atkins said, they are looking again, including looking at trades. So who knows? Every time I think I have a feel for what might be going on, the Padres do something like trade for Craig Kimbrell at the end of spring training. That happened a few years ago. And these things do occur, but I don't know that I expect it.
Kenny, your colleague Evan Drellich and a lot of people have done a lot of reporting on this. I'm calling them the ball police, the foreign substance police that we're going to see this year. Is this going to make a difference? You know, the possibility we're hearing that, you know, balls may be not confiscated. Well, yeah, essentially confiscated after game, and they may be examined for foreign substances, depending on spin rate, yada, yada, et cetera, et cetera. What's behind this? Like, I get the other rules changes and suggestions. I just can't find anybody who's really in favor of this, though, I don't think. Like, I don't think our hitters in favor of it, or our pitchers in favor of it.
I believe there are players who are in favor of it.
Okay.
And let's face it, we're talking about cheating here. If you're using and defacing a ball in any way, that's against the rules. And if it's helping you get more spin rate, that not per se is against the rules. There's no rules about spin rate. But if it's doing that, you're effectively gaining a competitive advantage that is illegal. So that's the goal. Now, we've been talking about this for years, right, guys? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, they're going to do something about guys who doctor the balls, and nothing ever happens. Now, this is a more interesting development along those lines. I have a hard time believing, unless you have a ball that is totally messed up, that you're going to be able to prove this. And let's just play this out. Pitcher starts off a game, spin rate jumps. They take a ball away, but maybe they take the ball away after this has already been taking place. I don't know. I just don't see how you're going to be able to correlate one with the other so easily. And I also don't know where the union would come down on this. I'm sure they would defend the pitchers. And it seems to me without actual evidence in the balls, you're going to have a hard time proving anything. So it's an interesting concept, certainly. You see a guy's spin rate jump from his norm. All right, let's look at the balls. But in practice, will it work? I don't know.
Well, it's like you think of how few guys, because we can all remember when guys got caught. Like, this is, this is, that's exactly. That's an age-old problem in baseball, right? It's been, like unless the nail file falls out on the ground.
Kevin Gross.
Yes.
It's tricky, right? And yeah, a variation in like the notion that you could pick up a variation. Again, you can pick up a variation spin rate. They have the technology, but that it seems like a big investment. I guess is what I'm saying, Ken, to pick up a variation in the spin rate to then communicate to the umpire saying, "Get that. He's got an unusually high spin rate. Get that ball out of the game." Whether that could actually lead to conviction in whatever form that would be. Look, maybe.
Yeah, would they get the ball in time? I mean, how fast is this all going to take place? Let's say you identify the jump in spin rate in the third inning, and then you start taking balls in the fourth. Well, maybe the pitcher's smart enough to – I don't know. Maybe he's using different balls. I have no idea what they're doing in that regard, but it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out for sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the whole chain of evidence thing too, right? Yeah. Like, what are you going to put the balls in a little hermetically sealed bag, and it's going to be like tagged, like CIS?
You can't throw the balls to the crowd this year, right? You're not allowed to do that because that would be the first thing. I would just toss the ball to the lucky kid in the stands, but you can't do that now.
Absolutely. Hey, Kenny, listen, we appreciate you doing this. Thanks so much, man.
Talk, guys. Talk to you later.
All right. As Ken Rosenthal, the Athletic. That's what I was thinking of, yeah. Quick, throw the ball in the crowd. Here, kid.
Here, kid.
Here, kid, take the ball.
Yeah, it's sticking to your hand. Oh, don't worry about that.
I'm disappointed because there's they're taking all the fun out of baseball. Kenny Rogers in the World Series. Remember the close-up of Kenny Rogers with the pine tar and Michael Pineda and Bullfrog, the not insecticide, the mosquito repellent that guy, the Bullfrog spit and what do you call it? The chalk that you used to mix.
I think the back and forth, the attempts to catch, and the mystery of what Phil Niekro was doing, and all of that stuff over the years. It's like you never really catch him, right?
The best gif I saw of it was somebody replaying Trevor Bauer turning around and throwing the ball over center field when Terry Francona came out to get him.
Yeah.
Can you imagine some pitcher doing that? We need your ball, son. Really? You want it? Here. Come get it.
Come get it.
You go into the bleachers at Yankee Stadium to get the ball.
I know we got to go here in a sec, but Ken was saying, I talked about the Jays bullpen, saying he thought they needed help there anyway. I'm on the other side on that. Like, I actually like their bullpen. I'm going to say I like their bullpen without. I do, because I like I believe in Jordan Romano. Maybe that's part of it. But I think there's a lot of possibilities there. And maybe it's based on the fact that I've seen these guys build bullpens out of straw the last couple of years. Right, like even in the bad years, they have done a very good job of assembling bullpens.
Yeah, but we've talked about this. So it would be nice to have a guy at the back end with a track record.
Well, but I've said earlier in the show, I've seen guys with track records come in here with lots of saves in their career records, and sometimes you want them when they were good, when they were accumulating those saves, not at the back end when they get paid. So
yeah,
the guys who saved the games in the biggest games in this team's history were not those.
I guess the question is, though, you look at even the closers who've sort of quote unquote come out of nowhere, the Nick Andersons.
Mm-hmm.
You compare their stuff to Jordan Romano.
Yeah.
And whose stuff are you more confident in over the long haul? If you go around. It just says to me this is an incomplete team, and that's
not the part I worry about, though.
That's fine.
We can talk about the rotation, and I think there are issues with the rotation. I think everybody knows, and I think they will be addressed one way or another, internally or externally, by the time we're talking trade deadline. But I think they've got a bunch of a bunch of other people's arms start falling off.
Yeah,
but. I think Ryan Baracki's a real asset in the bullpen. I think Julian Merriweather could be an asset in the bullpen.
They both have to stay healthy.
Yeah, of course.
And they haven't.
Yeah. No, they do. No, that's the health. Yes, they have to be able to pitch.
But yeah, and they haven't stayed healthy, and they were unable to stay healthy in a 60-game season. That would be part of my concern. But again, it's March 24th, and who knows?
I just didn't think this season that Kirby Yates that it hung in the balance as to whether Kirby Yates was the guy, because I wasn't sure he was going to be the guy anyway.
Ooh, I think he was.
But you're talking about guys who couldn't pitch. He couldn't pitch last year.
But I think there was the thought was that he was going to be pretty important to this team.
Well,